Welcome to Harry's Verse. Today's adventure, what if Harry Potter was Deadpool's reincarnation and broke every rule of magic? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, The Merc Wakes. The thing about dying is that everybody makes it sound profound, and it absolutely is not. There was no tunnel, there was no warm light, no choir, no dead relatives waiting in a sunlit field to tell him it had all been worth it. There was a wet red smear of pain, a punchline he never got to finish, and then a long nothing that felt like being put on hold by the universe's customer service line. And then, without ceremony, without permission, without so much as a courtesy email, there was a paper cut. It was a small thing. The edge of an envelope slid out from under the threadbare blanket in a cupboard that smelled of dust and old shoe. A thin line of red welled up across the pad of a too small finger, and a boy who had spent 11 years being told he was nobody put the finger in his mouth out of habit, and the cut closed. It closed the way water closes over a dropped stone. Quiet, total. Like the skin had simply remembered it was supposed to be whole and decided not to make a fuss about getting there. The boy pulled the finger out of his mouth and stared at it in the gray light leaking under the cupboard door, and somewhere very far down, in a place that had been locked and bricked over and forgotten, a door came off its hinges. Oh, thought the boy who was not, it turned out, only a boy. Oh no, no, not this, not the healing thing, I know that healing thing, I've been that healing thing. His name was Harry Potter, he was 11 years old. He was 4 feet and a rumor of inches tall, with a malnourished frame and his mother's eyes, and a scar on his forehead shaped like the kind of mistake you can't take back. His name was also Wade Winston Wilson, and he had been dead, and that had honestly seemed pretty final at the time. The memories did not arrive politely. They did not knock. 11 years of his life, beans on toast and Dudley's fists and Aunt Petunia's voice like a knife on a whetstone, and then behind it, underneath it, all at once and in no sensible order, a katana's weight balanced just behind the hip, the chemical bright taste of a Mexican cantina, a face in a cracked mirror that looked like a topographical map of a place no one should visit, a woman laughing, a needle. A tank of green fluid and a man with a clipboard who smiled in a way that meant he was about to take everything. Bullets, so many bullets going in and being pushed back out by flesh that grew faster than it died. The cancer, the cure that was worse. The healing factor that fixed the cells faster than the disease could ruin them and kept fixing until the only thing it couldn't fix was the part of him that found all of it unbearably funny. Harry Potter sat in the dark of the cupboard under the stairs at number 4 Privet Drive and made a sound that was halfway between a sob and a cackle. Okay, he whispered, and his voice cracked on it because it was a child's voice and that was going to take some getting used to. Okay, so reincarnation's real, that's new, filing that under things I could have used a heads up about. You're talking to yourself, said a voice. It was inside his skull and it was not his, or it was his the way a reflection is yours, the way a shadow is. It came in red. He couldn't have said how a voice came in a color except that it did, bright and reckless and grinning, the part of him that had always wanted to pull the pin and see. We're talking to ourselves, the red voice corrected. Which frankly is the most normal thing that's happened today. Hi, missed you. Love what they've done with the place. By the place, I mean this cupboard, and by love, I mean we are absolutely getting out of it. A second voice answered. This one came in white, cool, clipped, the accountant who'd been doing the math the whole time the rest of him was on fire. Healing factor confirmed intact, it observed. Body is 11 years old, undernourished, untrained. Memory of prior existence, complete. Current location, a cupboard. Recommend we determine why a mercenary's consciousness is occupying the body of an English child before we determine anything else. Right, Harry breathed. Right, yeah, good question, great question, top of the class question. He flexed the finger that had been cut, smooth, unmarked. The healing factor sat under his skin like an old engine turning over, patient, immortal his. Because here's the thing, guys, and I'm including the studio audience in guys. Hi, audience. He glanced up at the underside of the stairs as though something might be watching, and the strangest part was the conviction that something was. I died, I remember dying. I've got a pretty exhaustive collection of memories about dying, it's basically a hobby. So either this is the weirdest afterlife ever designed, or the white voice cut in dry as chalk. Or you've been reincarnated, retaining the regenerative capacity that defined your previous body, into a child the universe has apparently flagged as important. The scar suggests trauma, the malnourishment suggests neglect, the cupboard suggests we are not currently anyone's priority. That last one's gonna change, Harry said. He pushed the cupboard door open. It was locked from the outside, which would have been a problem for a normal 11-year-old. It was a brief and apologetic problem for him. The little hook latch was cheap and the wood was old, and a body with a healing factor does not particularly mind splinters. So Harry put his shoulder to the door and the latch surrendered with a crack like a knuckle, and he stepped out into the hall of number 4, blinking in the actual daylight for what felt, to two of him, like the first time. The house was small and beige and aggressively normal in a way that he found, with his merc's instinct for reading a room almost menacing. Everything matched. The carpet had been vacuumed into stripes. There was a framed cross-stitch on the wall that said, "Bless this home," and he looked at it for a long moment and thought somebody spent hours on that, hours, with a needle, by choice. From the kitchen came the clink of cutlery and the wet sounds of a large family eating. Harry walked toward it. He was aware in a distant clinical way that the old Harry, the boy whose body this was, whose 11 years of being small had grooved themselves into his nerves, would have hesitated here. would have made himself smaller. The grooves were still there. He could feel them, the flinch waiting in the meat of him. He just didn't use them. He pushed open the kitchen door, and three people looked up from their breakfast and went very still in three distinct and fascinating ways. There was the man Vernon, the name surfaced, mustache like an angry caterpillar, neck wider than his head, the specific purple of a man whose blood pressure was a personal achievement. There was the woman, Petunia, thin and sharp, a giraffe-neck study in suspicion. And there was the boy Dudley, round and pink and currently in the process of fitting an entire sausage into his mouth, which he stopped doing because something in the air had changed, and even an 11-year-old who'd never read a room in his life could feel it. "You're out of your cupboard," said Vernon. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict, delivered in the tone of a man who'd caught a dog on the dinner table. "I'm out of my cupboard," Harry agreed pleasantly. He crossed to the counter, hopped up to sit on it. His legs didn't reach the floor, which was an indignity he chose to find hilarious rather than depressing, and picked up an apple from the fruit bowl. He examined it. He took a bite. It was a perfectly good apple. "Honestly, Vern, between you and me, the cupboard thing was never going to hold long-term. Spatially, it's a non-starter. I'm a growing boy. I contain multitudes. Two of them are talking right now." "Don't tell them about us," said the white voice. "Tell them about us," said the red. Vernon's fork came down against his plate with a crack. "What did you call me?" Vernon, Big V the Verninator." Harry took another bite of the apple. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you because I just had what the literature calls a profound spiritual experience in your understairs storage solution, and I'm feeling generous. I know we haven't always gotten along. I know that historically you've operated under the impression that I'm a burden, a freak, and a drain on the household budget. And I want you to know," he pointed the apple at Vernon, "that I respect the consistency. 11 years, not one good day. That's a commitment to bit. I admire it." Petunia had gone the gray of old dishwater. "Vernon," she said low, "he's talking strangely." "Never talked. He's talking like one of them," Vernon said, and there was something underneath the bluster now, something Harry's old self recognized instantly, fear dressed up as anger because anger was the only suit it owned. "I won't have it. Do you hear me, boy? Whatever's gotten into you. Funny you should phrase it that way. I won't have it in my house. You'll get back in that cupboard and you'll—" Harry picked up the paring knife. He did it without menace, almost absently, the way you'd pick up a pen. The kitchen went silent in the particular way kitchens go silent when there's suddenly a blade in a child's hand. Dudley made a small wet sound. Petunia's chair scraped back an inch. "Relax," Harry said. "I'm not gonna hurt anyone. That's not the bit. The bit is educational." And he drew the edge of the knife across the back of his own forearm. It hurt. He wanted to be clear internally that it hurt. The healing factor took the damage. It didn't take the pain. That was the cruel joke at the center of the whole thing. That was the part Weapon X had laughed at. A bright line of red opened along his arm and welled and dripped onto Petunia's spotless counter, and Dudley screamed, and Vernon surged half out of his chair, and the cut closed. They watched it close. They watched the skin draw itself back together like a zipper run backward, watched the red line thin to pink and the pink fade to the ordinary pale of an ordinary arm until there was nothing left but the drying smear of blood that the wound had already disowned. Nobody said anything for a while. The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower droned because the world was insisting against all available evidence on being normal. "So that's a thing I can do now," Harry said into the silence. He set the knife down. He found a dish towel and wiped his arm and the counter with the brisk competence of a man who had cleaned up a great deal of blood in his time, most of it his own. "I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this because the dynamic in this house has changed and I want everybody operating with current information. The old arrangement, cupboard, chores, you pretending I'm furniture, that's done. Retired. We're gonna find a new equilibrium." He folded the towel. "I'm thinking I get Dudley's second bedroom, the one with all the broken toys. I'm thinking 3 meals. I'm thinking you and I develop the kind of relationship where you don't lock children in confined spaces, which, and I cannot stress this enough, is the floor. That's the floor of decent behavior. I'm offering you the floor." Vernon's mouth worked. No sound came out. "He's rebooting," the red voice noted cheerfully. "Look at him. Total system crash. Have you tried turning him off and on again?" "I think we've reached an understanding," Harry said, hopping down off the counter. His feet hit the floor and the impact traveled up through small bones that were going to ache later, and he grinned anyway because the alternative to grinning was thinking too hard about being 11 and dead and back. "Great talk, really. Group breakthrough. I'm gonna go look at my new bedroom. Don't get up." He got the second bedroom. He got it that afternoon, in fact, with a speed that suggested the Dursleys had collectively decided that whatever was wrong with him, it was best handled by giving it what it wanted and praying it stayed upstairs. The room was a graveyard of Dudley's excess, a birdcage with no bird, a television with a punch-tin screen, a shelf of toys broken in the specific way that meant they'd never been loved, only owned. Harry sat on the bed, which had actual springs, and let the new body settle around the old mind and tried to do the math. "Inventory," said the white voice, and he let it, because the white voice was good at this and the alternative was the red voice's plan, which so far appeared to be find Vernon's car and learn to drive it badly. Item 1, we are 11. Reflexes of a child untrained, but the healing factor scaffolds everything. We don't fear injury, which means we don't flinch, which is its own advantage. Item 2, we are apparently someone important. The scar, the neglect that nonetheless kept us alive. People do not lock away children they intend to forget. They lock away children they're afraid of. Item 3, Harry said aloud to the broken television, is that I'm taking this remarkably well, and I think that's worth examining. It was. He turned it over. He had died, really genuinely died, after a long career of not managing to, and instead of the comfort of an ending, he'd gotten a sequel nobody asked for. And the strange thing, the thing that sat in his chest like a swallowed coal, was that it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like the universe leaning down to him with that clipboard smile and saying, "You thought you were done? That's adorable." He should have been horrified. Part of him, the part with the grooves, the boy part, the 11 years of small, was horrified, was crouched somewhere deep and wide-eyed and waiting for the next bad thing. He could feel it. He decided with the whole force of a will that had outlasted cancer and torture and death itself to put an arm around that part and tell it the truth. The worst thing already happened. Twice. We're still here, so. He spent the rest of that day getting to know the equipment. This was a thing he'd done before in the other life, in the long bad stretch after Weapon X, when he'd had to learn a body that healed wrong and fast and forever, had to learn what it could take, where it lied to him, how much of the pain was real and how much was the nervous system filing a complaint with management. So he did it again now in the broken toy bedroom, with the door shut and the owl-shaped future watching from somewhere just out of frame. The body was small and weak and badly fed, and underneath that it was his, which meant the healing factor was already in it. He'd proved that twice with a knife, and which meant the rules were the same rules. He did push-ups until the arms gave out, and then he did 3 more and felt the muscle tear and stitch and tear, and knew that if he kept this up the body would come back stronger and faster than any 11-year-olds had a right to, because that was the other half of the gift, the half the cancer wards never got to see. The engine didn't just repair, it upgraded. It treated every injury as a note for next time. "This is going to be obscene," the red voice said happily. "Give us a year. Give us a year and a wand and we'll be a war crime in a school sweater. Give us a year and basic literacy in this society's rules," the white voice corrected, "so that when we break them we break the right ones in the right order for maximum effect." "You're both invited to the meeting," Harry said, and lay back on the springy bed, breathing hard, grinning at the ceiling. And then, because the body was tired and the mind was old and grief is a thing that waits for you to sit still, the other thing arrived. The quiet thing, it came up through the springs and the broken toys and the cupboard-shaped hollow 11 years had worn into him. There had been a boy here before, a real one. Harry Potter, age 0 to 11, who had lived in that cupboard and flinched at that voice and wished every birthday on candles he was never given for someone to come and take him somewhere he mattered. And that boy was what? Gone, overwritten, asleep underneath? Harry didn't know. He couldn't find a seam between himself and the child whose hands these were. There was no second tenant down there, no other voice. There was just him, Wade and Harry, one set of memories laid over another like 2 photographs in the same frame, and the suspicion that maybe they'd always been the same shape. A kid nobody wanted, a man nobody could kill, the universe's 2 favorite ways of saying you don't get to stop. He let himself feel it for exactly 1 breath, because that was the deal he'd made with the part of him that still had grooves. You get 1 breath and you get to mean it, and then we get up. "Okay, kid," he said softly to the body, to the boy, to whatever was or wasn't still in there. "I don't know if you can hear me, but somebody finally came to take you somewhere you matter. It's me, I'm somebody. I'm a little unconventional and I talk to the ceiling, but I promise you this, nobody is ever putting either of us back in a cupboard, not a Dark Lord, not a headmaster, not God if he's the one running this." He smiled at the broken television and his eyes were wet and he let them be once. "We're gonna have so much fun, we're gonna be so annoying, they're gonna wish they'd left us in the cupboard." Then he sat up, scrubbed his face with the heel of his hand, and the breath was over and he was up. And the warmth came back the way it always did, not because the sad thing got smaller, but because he decided 2 lifetimes running that the sad thing didn't get to drive. Dinner that night was the first interesting meal of Harry's 2 lives, mostly because of how hard everyone worked at pretending it was normal. Petunia had cooked enough for an army and put a full plate in front of Harry without being asked, which had never once happened in 11 years, and she did it while looking at a point roughly 6 inches above his head, as though direct eye contact might trigger another educational demonstration. Vernon ate in furious silence, his mustache trembling with the effort of not saying any of the things a man says when his entire model of the world has been shown a kitchen knife. And Dudley kept sneaking glances at Harry's forearm, at the spot where the cut had been, with the wide, unblinking horror of a boy who had spent his whole childhood being told the smaller cousin was the weak one. "Dudley," Harry said around a forkful of perfectly good roast, "you can stop staring at my arm. It's healed, it's been healed for hours. You're going to give yourself a crick." Dudley flinched so hard he knocked over his juice. Hey, easy." And here was the thing Harry hadn't expected, the thing that came up out of the old soldier and surprised him. He wasn't angry. He looked at his enormous, frightened, overfed cousin, a boy who'd been handed every toy and no actual love, a boy taught to throw his weight around because nobody had ever taught him anything better, and what he felt mostly was a kind of tired pity. "Listen to me, because I'm only going to say this once and then we never have to talk about feelings again, deal? You spent a lot of years using your fists on me, and I want you to know I'm not going to get you back for it. Not because I can't, I think we've established the dynamic has shifted, but because hitting a kid who was scared and bored and never told he was anything but a fist, that's a sad story, Big D, that's not a villain, that's a kid nobody bothered to raise right." He pointed his fork gently at Dudley's parents, who had both gone rigid. "That's a them problem. And I'm not going to make it worse by becoming the next person who hits you." The silence at the table was vast and total. Vernon's face had gone through purple and out the other side into a sort of stunned beige. You could, Petunia said very quietly, still not looking at him, her thin hands twisting her napkin, have done that to us at any time for years, couldn't you, with whatever you are now, Petunia? Harry set down his fork, and for once the comedy went all the way out of his voice, and what was left was old and level and almost kind. I've been able to do a lot of things to a lot of people for a very long time. The only trick that's ever mattered, the one thing I'd carve over the door of this nice beige house if you'd let me, is that being able to do a thing and choosing to do it are different rooms, and a whole life is just deciding which doors you walk through. He picked the fork back up. I'm not going to hurt you, any of you. I'm going to go to my magic school in September, and I'm going to come back here for the summers because apparently there's blood magic reasons I have to, and we are going to be the most boringly civil family in Surrey. You'll feed me. I'll do my own laundry. Nobody locks anybody in anything. And in exchange, I won't ever, even once, remind you of the morning a knife stopped meaning what you thought it meant. He smiled, and it didn't quite reach the cold place underneath, and all three Dursleys understood that the smile was the mercy and the cold place was the reason it was mercy. Pass the potatoes. Dudley passed the potatoes with both hands. Later, alone in the second bedroom, Hedwig's future perch still just a broken birdcage, Harry lay in the dark and let the quiet do its work. The grooves were still there, the flinch, the smallness, the 11 years of being furniture. He could feel the boy part of him marveling that the bullies had passed him the potatoes, that the cupboard was 100 miles behind them now, that he'd sat at the table like he belonged. He put an arm around that part the way he'd promised and let it have the win. That was restraint, the white voice observed, almost approvingly. We could have taken the house, the town if we wanted. Instead we negotiated a chore schedule. Boring, said the red voice. I had a whole plan involving Vernon's car and a roundabout. Yeah, well, Harry stared at the ceiling where he was increasingly sure an audience hung in the dark, watching, waiting to see what kind of story this was going to be. Here's the thing I figured out, lying in a cupboard with a finger that wouldn't stop healing. I've already been the guy who takes what he can take because he can take it. I did a whole lifetime of that. It's not a story, it's just noise that ends with you alone. He closed his eyes. This time I want to be in an actual story. The kind with people in it you'd run toward. And you don't get one of those by winning every room you walk into. You get it by choosing, on purpose, every single day not to. The house ticked and settled around him, beige and safe and changed forever. Somewhere far to the north, a cracked silver instrument cooled on a headmaster's desk. And Harry Potter, 11 years old, unkillable, and for the first night in either of his lives genuinely at peace, drifted off to sleep in an actual bed in an actual bedroom in a world that had just gotten very much more interesting and did not yet have the faintest idea what was coming for it. The next morning, an owl tried to deliver him a letter. He was ready for a lot of things. He was not ready for an owl. It came through the open window of his new bedroom in a soft brown storm of feathers, dropped a heavy cream-colored envelope on the bedspread and sat on the broken birdcage looking at him with the flat, judgmental patience of a creditor. Harry looked at the owl looked at Harry. Okay, he said slowly. Okay, I've taken a lot of things in stride lately, death, rebirth, the healing factor, the fact that I'm a tween, but I want it on the record that the owl is the part that's testing me. The envelope was addressed in green ink, and the address was specific in a way that made the hair on his arm stand up. Mr. H. Potter, the second bedroom, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. The second bedroom, he read aloud. It knows I moved rooms yesterday, it knows I moved rooms yesterday. He looked at the owl offered nothing. He turned the envelope over and broke the wax seal, a coat of arms, a lion and a snake and a badger and an eagle around a fat letter H, and unfolded the heavy parchment inside and read it again, and then he started to laugh. It was not entirely a sane laugh. The white voice noted this with concern. But it was the laugh of a man who had spent his entire existence as the universe's designated punchline finally being handed the script and discovering it was a comedy after all. Magic, he wheezed. It's magic. Hogwarts School of There's a school. There's a school for and they want I'm a wizard. He had to sit down, which was a problem because he was already sitting down, so he lay back on the bed instead and held the letter up over his face and shook with it. Of course. Of course, I come back from the dead with a healing factor, and the punchline is that this whole world has more impossible nonsense in it. Just lying around, just operating, just owls and wands, and this is good, the red voice decided. This is so good. We were worried this was going to be a normal life. Imagine a normal life with our face. Can you imagine the boredom? School implies structure, the white voice warned. Rules, hierarchy. People who will expect us to follow a curriculum and respect authority. Harry lowered the letter. He stared at the ceiling. A slow, wide, delighted, deeply alarming smile spread across the face of the boy on the bed. Yeah, he said. Yeah, it does. He did not tell the Dursleys about the letter. He didn't have to. The next several days delivered the answer in escalating volume, more owls, then a tide of them, then letters coming down the chimney and through the mail slot in a paper avalanche, until Vernon, purple and gibbering, packed the whole family into the car and fled to a miserable shack on a rock in the sea, as though distance were a thing that worked on magic. Harry went along for the ride mostly because he was curious how far the bit would go. It turned out, exactly as far as midnight on Harry's 11th birthday, when something began to knock on the door of the shack with the steady patience of a force that did not recognize doors as an obstacle so much as a formality. Vernon had a shotgun. This was new information about Vernon, and Harry marked it down as interesting, and we are going to have a conversation about gun safety later, Vern. Petunia clutched Dudley. The knocking continued, boom, 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 and then the door came off its hinges and fell flat into the room with a slap of wet wood, and in the doorway, ducking to fit dripping rain, was the largest human being Harry had ever seen. He was enormous. He was a continent in a moleskin coat. He had a beard like a hedge that had given up on civilization and a face mostly hidden in hair, and small black eyes that found Harry across the room and went soft and wet at the edges in a way that made the coal in Harry's chest shift uncomfortably. "Harry," the giant said, and his voice was a landslide with a lump in its throat. "Last time I saw ye, ye was only a baby. Ye look a lot like your dad, but ye have got your mum's eyes." Vernon worked the shotgun. The giant crossed the room in one stride, took the barrel in one enormous hand, and bent it up and around itself like a balloon animal without breaking stride or eye contact. "Okay," Harry said into the silence that followed. "I like him. Whoever this is, I like him. He's hired." The giant Rubius Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. The name came out of him in an apologetic flood, along with a slightly squashed birthday cake produced from somewhere inside the coat, sat down on a sofa that immediately regretted it, and explained. He explained that Harry was a wizard. He explained that Harry's parents had been a wizard and a witch, and that they had not died in a car crash, as the Dursleys had told him, but had been murdered. He explained the name Voldemort, and Hagrid flinched saying it, the way you flinch from a hot stove, and he explained that this dark wizard had killed Harry's parents and then turned his killing curse on a one-year-old Harry, and that the curse had impossibly rebounded, that the dark wizard had been destroyed or near enough, and that the baby had survived with nothing but a scar. "They call ye the boy who lived," Hagrid said, with a reverence that made Harry's skin crawl in a brand new direction. "And here is the thing that mattered, the thing that the cosmic accountant in the white and the cosmic gremlin in the red both went quiet for. Because Harry Potter, the original one, the boy whose body this was, had a scar shaped like a curse that should have killed him and hadn't. And Wade Wilson had a healing factor that meant death had filed for divorce. And somewhere in the overlap of those two impossible facts, in the place where a child who couldn't be killed by the worst curse in the world grew up to be the reincarnation of a man who couldn't be killed by anything at all, there was a logic so dark and so funny that Harry had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing in the face of a weeping giant. The prophecy, the white voice murmured, though they didn't know the word for it yet. There's a shape to this. Someone built this. Someone wanted the boy who couldn't die, and instead the red voice said, gleeful, vicious, delighted, they got us. Hagrid, Harry said, and his voice came out steadier than an 11-year-old's had any right to. I want to make sure I've got this. There's a dark wizard. He killed my parents. He tried to kill me, and it didn't take. And everyone's been waiting 11 years for me to grow up and finish the story, be the chosen one. There's a prophecy or a destiny or there's a script, isn't there? There's a thing I'm supposed to do. Hagrid blinked at him, rain dripped from his beard. You're a sharp one, he said uneasily. Dumbledore said you might be. There's them a say ye're meant for great things, Harry. You stopped him once. When you were a baby, people remember thaw. Right, Harry said. Right, great. He looked at the cake. It said HAPPEBIRTHDIE in green icing. Somebody enormous had made him a cake with his own 2 hands and gotten the spelling wrong, and Harry felt the coal in his chest crack right down the middle. And he understood with the awful clarity that the healing factor had never been able to fix, that he was going to love it here, and that loving things was the most dangerous game a man who couldn't die had ever learned to play. He decided on the spot, on the wet floor of a shack in the middle of a storm-thrashed sea, 2 things. The first was that he was going to Hogwarts, obviously. There was a school for magic and he could not be killed, and that combination was frankly a public safety concern that he intended to become personally. The second was that he was not, under any circumstances, going to do it the way the script wanted. Hagrid, he said, one question, the people who have been waiting for me, the wise old man, the Dark Lord, the whole apparatus, the destiny machine. He smiled, and it was his mother's eyes and a dead man's grin and something underneath both that had survived 2 whole lifetimes of being told what it was for. Do any of them know I can't die? Hagrid frowned. What do ye mean, can't die? Yes, survived a curse, Harry. Thaw's a one-time thing. Thaw's your mum's love that did thaw. It's not. Harry picked up the paring knife. It was, he'd realized later, an unkind thing to do to a man who'd just baked him a cake. But the white voice insisted on data and the red voice insisted on theater, and the boy in the middle of them had spent 11 years being small and was done auditioning for anyone's approval. He drew the blade across his palm, showed Hagrid the red line, and showed him, a heartbeat later, the unbroken skin where the red line had been. Hagrid did not scream. He was made of sterner stuff than the Dursleys. But he went very still and very pale under the beard, and the small black eyes fixed on Harry's healed palm with an expression that Harry recognized, because he'd seen it on the face of every doctor and torturer and would-be killer who'd ever realized what he was. Awe and horror holding hands, the look that said that's not supposed to be possible, and underneath it quieter, the look that said, what are you? For one cold beat the comedy fell out of the room entirely. The wound had closed like something old and patient remembering its own shape, not a trick, not a charm, but a deep and tireless engine that had decided, a long time ago and in another life, that this particular collection of cells was not allowed to stop. Hagrid felt it the way you feel a cliff edge in the dark. The rain hammered the roof. Somewhere the Dursleys held their breath. Then Harry grinned, and the warmth came back into the room like a light switched on, and he licked the last of the blood off his already healed palm and said, "So, shopping, you mentioned shopping. I'm gonna need a wand, some books, in the name of whoever's been telling people my parents died in a car crash because that person and I are going to have words." Hagrid stared at him a moment longer. Then, because he was a kind man, and because kind men have a gift for deciding to be glad about things they don't understand, he laughed, a great booming landslide of a laugh that shook rainwater from his beard and rattled the windows of the miserable little shack. "Blimey, Harry," he said, wiping his eyes. "You're gonna give 'em all heart attacks, you are." "Hagrid," said Harry Potter, who was also Wade Wilson, who was 11 years old and unkillable and absolutely thrilled about exactly one of those things, "you have no idea." They talked through the rest of the night because the storm wasn't done and the Dursleys had barricaded themselves in the shack's one bedroom and there was nowhere to go. Hagrid built a fire in the cold grate with a flick of a battered pink umbrella, which Harry clocked instantly as a wand or wand adjacent, and made a mental note about because a man who hid a weapon inside something everyone dismissed was a man worth understanding, and produced sausages from the coat, and they ate them off the points of toasting forks while the wind tried to peel the roof off. And Harry asked questions. This was the part the white voice approved of, and the part the boy with the grooves found, to his own surprise, that he wanted to do anyway. Because the thing about waking up dead in a stranger's life with a healing factor and a destiny was that information was the only currency that mattered, and Hagrid, gentle, loyal, indiscreet Hagrid, was a leaking tap of it. So Harry learned. He learned that there was a whole world folded up inside the ordinary one, a world of wands and potions, and a government called the Ministry that policed a thing called the Statute of Secrecy, which was the rule that kept the magical world hidden from the rest. He learned about the four houses of Hogwarts and the headmaster, an old wizard named Albus Dumbledore, whom Hagrid spoke of in the tone most men reserve for weather and God. He learned that money was kept in a bank run by goblins, that brooms could fly, that the dark wizard who'd killed his parents had followers called Death Eaters, some of whom had walked free by claiming they'd been bewitched. He learned, in other words, that the entire society he was about to walk into ran on tradition, deference, and a deep and load-bearing assumption that the rules were the rules because they had always been the rules. He kept Hagrid talking because every answer was a brick and he was building something. How does a wand work? Does it aim the magic, or make it, or just give it permission? Hagrid wasn't sure. Nobody really was. The wand chose the wizard, which Harry translated instantly to resonance: undocumented, exploitable. Can you do magic without one? You weren't supposed to, but children did it by accident all the time, which told Harry the wand was a focusing tool, not a power source. Good, that was a dependency he could root around. Was there a way the Ministry knew when a young wizard broke the rules? A trace, Hagrid said, on under-17s that flagged magic done outside school, and Harry filed that away as the most important fact of the night, because a surveillance system that watched for spells was a system that did not, by definition, watch for a boy who solved his problems with his fists, or his teeth, or a length of pipe, or any of the 1,000 unmagical answers a mercenary kept in his back pocket. Where are ye asking all this? Hagrid said at last, squinting through the firelight with the dawning unease of a man who's realized the child has been interviewing him. Because everybody's about to hand me a rulebook, Harry said, and I like to read the whole thing before I decide which pages to eat. He grinned. It's a metaphor, mostly. Oh, this is going to be fun, the red voice purred. Hagrid, Harry said, turning a sausage in the fire. Let me ask you something, this Dumbledore, the boy who lived thing. The prophecy or destiny or whatever's got everyone looking at me like I'm a lottery ticket that hasn't been scratched yet. He kept his voice light, conversational, a kid asking about football. It was a technique. He'd used it on harder men than a half-giant with a soft heart. Was it Dumbledore who decided I should grow up in a cupboard? Be honest, I'm not going to be mad, I'm collecting facts. Hagrid's enormous face did a complicated thing. Now, Don, go thinkin'. Dumbledore's a great man, Harry, greatest wizard there is. He left you with your aunt cuz there's old magic, blood magic, your mum's sacrifice. It protects ya while ya live where her blood lives. He did it to keep ya safe. Safe, Harry repeated. He looked at the fire. 11 years of cupboard, of Dudley's fists, of a family that flinched from him like he was a stain. Safe. The word sat in his mouth like a tooth that had gone bad. Yeah, I felt very safe. And then, because the boy underneath deserved to have it said once and only once plainly and then put down, he knew, didn't he, the greatest wizard there is. He knew what kind of house he was leaving a baby in, and he decided a miserable childhood was an acceptable price for the protection. Because the protection is what makes the weapon work. He's been playing a long game since I was one, and I'm the piece he's moving. The fire popped. Hagrid looked stricken, the look of a man who has accidentally let a child see the gears of the world too early. Harry let him off the hook because he liked him and because cruelty to kind people was beneath even a mercenary. He grinned and bit the sausage off the fork. Relax, big guy, I'm not going to hold it against you. You're the messenger. I love the messenger. The messenger baked me a cake. He chewed, thoughtful. Here's the thing, though, and I want you to carry this back to whoever's listening because somebody always is. He looked briefly up at the rafters at the dark, at the place where he was increasingly certain an audience sat. Everybody in this story has a plan for me. The old man's got a plan. The dark guy presumably had a plan before I ruined it as an infant by being inconveniently hard to kill. The whole magical world's got 11 years of plans saved up. And not one of those plans accounts for the fact that I think the entire premise is hilarious, and I have absolutely no intention of doing any of it the way it's written. Mission statement, the white voice noted with what might have been approval, reckless, unsupported by resources, but clear. You're a strange one, Harry Potter, Hagrid said, shaking his head, the firelight gold in his beard. Strangest one there is, Harry agreed. Greatest strange there is, you might say. He stretched out by the fire, small body aching, 2 lifetimes old, mind wide awake, and watched the flames remember how to be warm. The healing factor hummed under his skin, patient as a tide. Somewhere out in the dark, a dark lord was less than a wraith, and an old man was bent over a cracked silver instrument, and both of them, in their separate and clever ways, believed they understood the boy by the fire. They did not. That was the only prophecy that mattered, and Harry was the one making it. Outside, the storm began at last to break. And 1,100 miles north, in a circular office full of whirring silver instruments, an old man with a long white beard and half-moon spectacles paused over a delicate device that had monitored the well-being of a certain boy for 10 years without once telling him anything he didn't expect. The little instrument puffed a ring of smoke, as it always did. Then it puffed a second ring, which it never had. Then it made a sound that Albus Dumbledore had never heard it make in all his long and careful life. A sound, if an instrument of fine silver and old magic could be said to make such a thing, very much like a laugh, and a hairline crack ran around its base, and a single, impossible word condensed in the smoke above it before dissolving. The word was boop. Dumbledore looked at it for a long time. Then he sat down slowly in the manner of a man who has spent decades building a very intricate machine and has just heard from somewhere deep inside it the first small and unmistakable sound of a wrench being thrown. Now what, he said to no one, have we here? Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Breaking the rules, the Leaky Cauldron was a pub that other pubs walked past without seeing, which Harry decided was either excellent security or a deeply unflattering thing to say about other pubs. Hagrid steered him through it by one enormous hand on the shoulder, and the moment they crossed the threshold, the room turned the way rooms turn when a celebrity walks in, that ripple of recognition, the conversations dropping out one by one like candles being pinched. A toothless old witch lowered her sherry. A young man in a turban flinched so hard he nearly went into the fireplace. It's him, somebody breathed. It's Harry Potter. And then they were on him. A swarm of them, all reaching, all wanting to shake the hand of the boy who lived, beaming, weeping, thanking him for a thing he'd done before he could form sentences. Hands everywhere, names he didn't catch, such an honor, welcome back, we're all so grateful. The old Harry would have shrunk. The grooves were screaming at him to shrink. Wade Wilson had played a lot of rooms. He gave them a show. Thank you, please, no autographs. Okay, one autograph, folks, I love you too, it's so good to be back. It's been what, 10 years? 10 years. You all look incredible. Did you do something with the place? The cobwebs are very lived in, sir. You the gentleman crying into the fire. Whiskey, I see you, I appreciate you, ma'am. Yes, you can touch the scar, it's just a scar, it doesn't grant wishes, I've checked. A small round wizard was shaking his hand for the third time. A witch was telling him urgently that she'd named her cat after him. Somebody was weeping with what appeared to be sincere joy. Harry wrote it like a wave, beaming, working the crowd, and underneath the performance, the white voice was taking attendance. Every person in this room loves a version of you that doesn't exist. That is the most useful and most dangerous thing about you in this society. They have built a statue, and they are about to be very surprised when it climbs down off the plinth and starts taking requests. The turbaned man hung back at the edge of it, pale and twitchy, with a stammer in his voice and a smell of garlic about him. Harry made a point of reaching him last, of cutting through the crowd to do it, because the man's reluctance was the only interesting thing in the room. And you, sir, Harry said, taking the damp offered hand. The turban killer look, very mysterious. What's the occasion? P. Potter, the man managed. See, can't tell you how pleased I am to meet you. Q. Quirrell, D. Defense against the D. Dark Arts. Bold subject for a man who's afraid of his own turban, Harry said warmly, and shook the hand and felt, for one flicker, fast as a struck match, something cold slide across the back of his scar. Not a headache, a draft. As though for 1 second somebody had opened a window in a sealed room and the air that came through had come from somewhere with no sun in it. His scar prickled. The white voice went very still. Note that it said quietly, that man, or what's wearing him, we'll come back to it. Harry kept smiling, pumped Quirrell's clammy hand twice more for the crowd, and followed the cold draft under the dark. Guy is closer than anyone thinks, and he smells like a salad. Then Hagrid was tugging him through the back of the pub into a small walled courtyard, where the half-giant counted bricks tapped one with the pink umbrella, and the wall folded itself open like a flower deciding to be a doorway. Diagon Alley unspooled in front of them. It was, and Harry was a man who had seen a great deal, a genuinely magnificent assault on the senses. A crooked cobbled street that ignored the laws of straight lines, packed shopfront to shopfront with cauldrons stacked in towers, owls in cages, a window full of broomsticks with a knot of boys pressed against the glass, apothecaries breathing out smells that punched you in the sinuses, robes and telescopes and barrels of bat spleens. Overhead the signs swung and repainted themselves. Somewhere a wizard was demonstrating self-stirring spoons at a volume the law should have prohibited. Okay, Harry said, turning a slow circle in the middle of it, 2 lifetimes of him grinning out of one 11-year-old face. Okay, I take it all back, every cynical thing I've ever thought. This is the best afterlife, 10 out of 10 would die again. Focus, said the white voice, bank first. We have no resources and no leverage. Both of those start with money. Gringotts was a building that did not so much stand as loom. a snowy multi-story marble thing tilted just slightly, the way a man leans when he's deciding whether to take your coat or your spine. The doors were guarded by a creature roughly waist-high to Hagrid, with long, clever fingers and a face like a clenched fist, and over the inner doors a poem was engraved in letters of warning, promising any thief a fate involving the loss of everything they'd come for and rather more besides. Harry read it twice. The crowd flowed past it without a glance. Wizards, he was already noticing, had a gift for stopping seeing things that had always been there. He did not have that gift, he'd never had it. They put the thread in verse, he murmured. That's not decoration, that's a flex. Whoever runs this place wants you to know they're smart enough to be poetic about it and still kill you. I respect that. Hagrid, note for the file, the goblins are the most dangerous thing I've seen in this alley, and everybody's treating them like ticket clerks. He stepped through the doors. Rule of any new town, figure out who's actually holding the gun. Usually it's the quiet professional everyone's learned to ignore. Inside, behind a long counter, 100 goblins weighed gems and scratched in ledgers and counted coins with a speed that made Harry's old mercenary heart sing. He approached the nearest one, a sour, narrow creature perched high on a stool, and instead of doing what every wizard in the line was doing, which was talking down at the goblin in the bright, loud voice people use on waiters, Harry stopped, looked up at him, and inclined his head a precise few degrees. "Morning," he said. "Harry Potter. I've got a key somewhere and apparently a vault, and a very large man behind me has official Hogwarts business he'll explain in a second. I won't waste your time. I can see you're the only people in this country who actually count things correctly, and I'd like us to start off on the right foot." The goblin's quill stopped. He looked down at the small boy with the famous scar, and something moved behind the ancient flat eyes. Surprise recalibrated instantly into wary interest. Wizards did not, as a rule, notice goblins were in the room, let alone flatter them with precision. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said slowly, "your key." Hagrid produced it, along with a letter on heavy parchment that he leaned in to deliver with the gravity of a state secret. "Also, Professor Dumbledore gave me this. It's about the you-know-what in Vault 713. "Catalog that," said the white voice instantly. "He just told the whole bank and us that there is a thing important enough for the headmaster to be moving it personally and secretly on the same day the new term begins. A thing, in this bank. We will be filing that under leverage and revisiting it." The cart ride down to the vaults was a roller coaster built by a maniac through the inside of a mountain, and Harry whooped the entire way, which scandalized the goblin and terrified Hagrid, who went a delicate green and announced he'd wait by the cart. Harry's own vault turned out to contain a small fortune in gold and silver and bronze coins, mounted up and gleaming, left to him by parents he'd never met. He stood in front of it for a moment, and the comedy went quiet, and he let himself have the one beat. "They left me this. They didn't know they were going to die, and they left me a future anyway." Then he scooped a generous quantity into the offered pouch, because grief was real and so was logistics, and a soldier who'd ever gone hungry did not leave money on the table. On the way back up, the cart stopped at Vault 713, and the goblin pressed a long finger to a door with no keyhole, and the door simply melted away. Inside, in the middle of an enormous empty stone chamber, sat one small grubby package wrapped in brown paper. Harry looked at it. One small package. A whole high-security vault deep in a dragon-guarded bank to hold one thing the size of a fist. "Whatever that is," the white voice said, "it is the engine of this year's entire plot. Note the dimensions. Note that they're hiding something tiny in the biggest, loudest hiding place available, which is what you do when you want the wrong people to come looking in the wrong direction. Note that we now know more than we are supposed to." "Note taken," Harry murmured, and Hagrid tucked the package inside his coat, and they went up and out into the sun, and Harry said nothing at all about it, which was its own kind of discipline, and filed the silence away as a thing he'd spend later. They split the list after that. Hagrid, looking peaky from the cart and muttering something about a pick-me-up, went off to the leaky cauldron, and Harry, armed with a pouch of gold and a child's freedom that nobody in this world seemed inclined to question, went shopping. He started with robes because the list started with robes, and because Madame Malkin's was the nearest shop with a door that didn't sell anything that could bite him. Inside, a squat, smiling witch with a tape measure stood him on a stool beside another boy already being fitted, pale, pointed silver blonde with a chin that arrived in a room a half-second before the rest of him. Harry knew the type before the boy opened his mouth because he'd seen the elder model that very afternoon in a dark alley, leaning on a snake-headed cane. "Hello," the boy drawled in the bored voice of someone performing boredom. "Hogwarts 2. "Hogwarts 2, Harry agreed, holding his arms out for the pins. "My father's next door buying my books and my mother's up the street looking at wands," the boy went on, not really asking, just broadcasting. "Then I'm going to drag them off to look at racing brooms. I don't see why first years can't have their own. I think I'll bully father into getting me one and smuggle it in somehow." He examined Harry sidelong. "Have you got your own broom?" "Nope. Play Quidditch at all?" "Don't know what it is yet, but I already love that it sounds like something you'd catch from a toilet seat." The boy blinked, derailed, then recovered into a sneer. "Honestly, well, I know I'll be in Slytherin. All our family have been. Imagine being in Hufflepuff. I think I'd leave, wouldn't you?" He gave a thin laugh. "I say, look at that man." Hagrid had appeared in the window, grinning and pointing at Harry through the glass, holding up 2 large ice creams. The boy's lip curled. "That's the gamekeeper, isn't it? A sort of servant." "That," said Harry pleasantly, "is my friend, and he's twice the wizard you'll be and roughly 9 times the man, and he bent a shotgun into a balloon animal this week without spilling his tea, so let's everybody be a little careful about the word servant." The boy's chin retracted. "You don't even know who I am." Sure I do, your junior. I met your dad in Nocturne Alley an hour ago. Lovely hair, terrible posture, the kind of guy who calls a child a prize. Harry watched the recognition land, watched the boy's pale eyes flick to his forehead and snag on the scar, watched the board mask crack straight down the middle. And you're about to be the kid who for the next 7 years gets to tell people he insulted Hagrid in front of Harry Potter on day one. That's your villain origin story, Junior. Wear it with pride. You're your Potter in the flesh, most of which is mine. Harry hopped off the stool, robes pinned, and clapped the gaping boy on the shoulder with genuine, unsettling warmth. Draco right, Draco Malfoy, here's some free advice from a guy who's older than he looks. The whole right sort of people thing your dad's selling you, it's a pyramid scheme. The product is contempt and the only people buying are people who already bought it. You seem smart under all the hair gel. Spend it on something better. He flipped a gold coin to Madame Malkin, told her to keep the change, and left Draco Malfoy standing on a stool with his mouth open, having his first genuinely confusing experience. That was almost kind, the white voice observed. That was recruitment, the red voice corrected. Long game, we just planted a doubt in a Death Eater's son. Could grow into anything. Could grow into a friend, Harry said, taking his ice cream from Hagrid in the street. Could grow into a problem, I'm flexible. He ate the ice cream, it was excellent. He was 11 and unkillable and had just made a Malfoy reconsider his entire worldview before lunch, and the sun was out, and for one whole minute he let it just be a good day. He bought his books next and bought more than the list demanded, bought the curriculum, then bought everything around the curriculum, the histories and the theory, and a battered second-hand copy of a book on magical law that the shopkeeper seemed surprised anyone would want. Because the white voice was right, he was about to be handed a rule book, and you read the whole thing before you decided which pages to eat. By the time he left Flourish and Blots, he understood 3 things the average 11-year-old wizard would not learn for years, and the most useful of the 3 was this: the magical world had almost no concept of an unmagical solution. Its locks were warded against spells and not against crowbars. Its laws punished the wand and ignored the fist. Its entire security architecture assumed that a threat would always play by the rules of magic. It went deeper than that even. He skimmed a chapter on the great wizarding duels and noticed that every single one had been fought by the rules: wands raised, bows exchanged, a whole etiquette of murder. He read about Azkaban, a fortress so confident in its magical defenses that it apparently had no walls a human being couldn't, in principle, simply climb. He read about the unforgivable curses and noted that the worst spell in the world, the one that killed instantly and without fail, had exactly one documented survivor, and that the survivor was him, and that the wizarding world had responded to a child surviving the unsurvivable not by asking how but by writing a song about it. They don't troubleshoot, the white voice said with something almost like wonder. They mythologize. Something impossible happens, and instead of reverse engineering it, they build a holiday around it. Harry, this entire civilization has no immune system for a person who asks, but why does it actually work that way? We are going to walk through them like a screen door. Try not to sound so happy about it, Harry murmured, and bought a crowbar from a Muggle hardware shop on the way back to the wall, because he was nothing if not a man who listened to his own advice. He bought a trunk and a telescope he'd never use, and over the strenuous objection of absolutely no one, because he was a famous child with a bag of gold, he bought, from a dusty corner of a junk shop in a side alley, a set of perfectly ordinary, perfectly non-magical, perfectly lethal hardware. A good knife, a length of fine wire, a small folding tool with too many functions, and a coil of climbing rope. The shopkeeper assumed it was for some wholesome, boyish project. Harry let him. Redundancy, the white voice approved. Magic is a system, and every system has an off day. The wand can be snapped, the spell can be jinxed, the hand can always hold a knife. The apothecary nearly undid him in the best way. It was a cramped, fabulous, reeking cave of a shop. The walls lined floor to ceiling with jars, eyes that tracked him, roots shaped like screaming men, powders that glowed, a barrel of something that hissed when he leaned too close, and Harry stood in the middle of it for a full minute just breathing it in, because in the other life he'd known exactly 2 kinds of chemistry, the kind that healed him against his will and the kind that blew things up, and here was a whole third kind. An entire science of transformation sold by the ounce to schoolchildren. Okay, he said to the proprietor, a stooped man weighing beetle eyes on a brass scale. Genuine question, no sarcasm, I promise. Any of this stuff that a person definitely should not combine. Asking because I have a feeling my potions teacher is going to be the kind of guy who hands a room full of 11-year-olds a cauldron and a grudge, and I'd like to know in advance which jars turn the classroom into a crater. The proprietor, who had spent 40 years being asked which love potions worked, looked up at the small boy asking with apparent sincerity for a list of the most dangerous reactions in the shop, and something in his weathered face shifted toward respect. He answered, at length. Harry listened to every word and bought the standard student kit, and then quietly bought 3 additional ingredients that the proprietor noted were not on any first-year list, and asked no questions because the boy paid in gold and had the unsettling, attentive stillness of someone who actually intended to use the knowledge. Bezoars, a vial of essence of dittany, and the makings of a basic Wiggenweld, the white voice catalogued, pleased, healing potions, for a body that already heals. Redundant. Not for me, Harry pocketed them, for the people standing next to me. The healing factor's got exactly 1 passenger and it's me. Everybody I'm about to start caring about heals at the normal, tragic, breakable human speed, so I carry the dittany. He stepped back out into the bright, crooked alley. Lesson 1 of being the unkillable guy in a room full of mortals, and I learned it the hard way in another life. Your job stops being staying alive. It's already done staying alive, it's automatic, it's boring. Your job becomes keeping everybody else alive. That's the whole gig, that's the only gig that ever mattered. He drifted on through the wonder of it. He pressed his nose to the window of the Quidditch shop, where a knot of older boys stood worshipping a gleaming racing broom on a pedestal, and listened to them recite its top speed and its breaking charm and its handcrafted ash handle the way the faithful recite scripture, and he found the whole thing delightful. A sport, an actual sport, fast and dangerous and played in the air, and he clocked that flying was a thing this world did casually, which meant flying was a thing he'd be doing soon, which meant. The red voice noted with glee that the question of whether a man who couldn't die could also be made to fear heights was about to get answered very publicly. He passed the magical menagerie, loud with the racket of 100 creatures and a pet shop, and a stall selling self-shuffling tarot decks that he watched a fortune-teller use to predict, with total confidence, a future that Harry, who had now been reincarnated across what he was fairly sure were entirely separate fictional properties, found hysterically optimistic about anyone's ability to predict anything. "Buddy," he told the fortune-teller, dropping a coin in her bowl, "I've read ahead in my own story more than once and I still couldn't tell you what happens next. The cards are a lovely bit, keep doing the bit, but the only honest prophecy is something probably and you'll deal with it. Everything else is set dressing." He grinned at her affronted face and moved on, his arms full of parcels, his pouch lighter, his head fuller, a whole secret world unspooling around him in gold and smoke and noise, and the longer he walked it, the more the shape of the thing came clear to him, the load-bearing assumption underneath every shopfront and every spell and every reverent recitation. That magic was a tradition to be inherited, not a system to be questioned. Everyone here had been handed the rules by someone older, who'd been handed them by someone older still, all the way back, and somewhere in that long chain of handing down, everyone had quietly stopped asking why. Harry had never in 2 lives stopped asking why. It was the most dangerous thing about him, more than the healing, more than the wit. And as he turned at last toward the seedier end of the street, toward the crooked dark mouth of an alley the nice shops pretended not to see, he was already cataloging, already building the file, already mapping a society's blind spots with the cheerful patience of a man who had found, against all odds, a brand new world to be smarter than. Nocturne Alley he found by following the part of the map that the nice parts of the map were clearly embarrassed about. It branched off the main street like a bad decision, narrow and crooked and lit the color of a bruise, and the shops there sold shrunken heads and instruments of obscure cruelty and books that watched you back. The few wizards slinking through it gave the famous boy a wide and suspicious berth. Harry strolled it like a man browsing a clearance aisle. "Shrunken heads," he said to one proprietor, picking one up and addressing it directly. "Buy 3 get the 4th free, no tough market." He set it down. "You should diversify. Have you considered a loyalty card? 10 curses get the 11th half off. People love feeling valued even when they're being cursed, especially when they're being cursed." It was there, browsing a cabinet of cursed jewelry he had no intention of buying, that he confirmed who Lucius Malfoy was, because the man's gray eyes had found Harry's scar across the dim shop with the unmistakable recalibration of someone whose afternoon had just gotten more complicated. Their exchange that afternoon had been brief, Malfoy probing soft as a knife between ribs, "Where's your keeper? How exposed are you? What do you know about your own value?" And Harry, who had sat across tables from 100 men running exactly that routine, had given him the only honest answer he had. "I'm not a piece," he'd said, easy and bright. "People keep trying to put me on the board. The old man wants me on his side. The other guy, the one whose name everyone's scared of, the one whose followers I'm given to understand mostly avoided prison by swearing up and down they were bewitched." And he'd watched the precise instant Malfoy's eyes went flat. "He wants me on his side too, or dead, depending on his mood. So pass it up the chain to whoever you report to. I'm not a piece. I'm the guy who flips the table." He turned his back on a Malfoy in a dark alley after that, deliberately, the calculated insult of it, showing the man his unprotected spine because nothing in the world could put a hole in him that wouldn't close, and walked out whistling. By tonight, somebody who mattered would know the Potter boy wasn't what the file said. Let them chew on it. "Now," he told Hagrid, stepping back into the bright, crooked main street. "Last stop, the fun one. I need a stick that shoots magic, and apparently the stick gets to have opinions about me, which is the single most ridiculous sentence I've ever said, and I have said so many." Ollivander sat at the narrow end of the alley, a single dusty wand on a faded cushion in the window, the shop so old and quiet it seemed to hold its breath. Inside, thousands of slim boxes climbed the walls into shadow, and the air had the hush of a library or a chapel or the moment before a sniper exhales. Mr. Ollivander materialized out of the gloom the way some old men do, soundless, his pale white eyes catching the light like a cat's. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you, Mr. Potter," he breathed. "It seems only yesterday your mother and father were in here buying their first wands, 10¼ inches willow, your mother's nice wand for charm work. Your father favored a mahogany, 11 inches, pliable. A little more power, excellent for transfiguration. That's a genuinely lovely thing to remember about 2 people," Harry said, and meant it, the warmth landing under the comedy, and also a slightly unsettling amount of inventory tracking. "You remember every wand you've ever sold." Everyone, said Ollivander, and the way he said it made the hair stand up on Harry's arms because it wasn't sentiment, it was certainty, the flat confidence of a man who has built his whole long life on the belief that wands and their owners were a destiny you could file alphabetically. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter, it has always been so. There it was again, the reverence, the script. The wand chooses the wizard, said like a closing door, like a thing you were not meant to question. Harry questioned it. See, that's the part I want to poke at, he said, as a measuring tape began on its own to measure him in increasingly personal places. Because either the wand is a person, in which case we have a slavery problem and a very weird shop, or chooses is doing some heavy lifting and what you actually mean is resonance. There's a compatibility between the wand's materials and the wizard's magic, and a good match channels cleaner than a bad one. Which would mean the wand doesn't choose me any more than a key chooses a lock. It's just a fit, a really, really well-marketed fit. He grinned. No offense, great branding. The wand chooses the wizard sells a lot better than biometric compatibility. Results may vary. Ollivander stared at him with those wide, pale eyes and for a long moment said nothing at all. Then he turned and began pulling boxes from the shelves, and there was something different in the set of his shoulders now, something working. The first wand did nothing. The second filled the room with a smell of singed hair. The third he'd barely raised before Ollivander snatched it back. Wand after wand, the pile of rejects growing on the counter, Ollivander getting not frustrated, Harry realized, but delighted in the manner of a craftsman handed a genuinely difficult problem. Tricky customer, eh? He murmured, eyes shining. Don't worry, we'll find the match somewhere here. And then he went very still and looked at Harry for a long moment and crossed to a particular shelf and came back with a particular box and lifted from it a wand of pale wood that the instant Harry's fingers closed around it sent a sudden warmth up his arm and a stream of red and gold sparks spitting from the tip like a struck flint. The dust in the air lit up gold. For a heartbeat the whole dim shop was warm. Oh, bravo, Ollivander whispered. Yes, yes, very good, curious. Curious? I feel like curious from the wand guy is the kind of thing that turns out to matter in Chapter 40, Harry said. Go on, hit me, what's curious? Holly and phoenix feather, said Ollivander softly, 11 inches nice and supple. Curious because I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter, and the phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand, that bird gave only one other feather, just one other. And it is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother, Mr. Potter, gave you that scar. The shop went quiet. Ollivander's pale eyes were fixed on him, drinking in the moment, waiting. Harry understood with sudden clarity for the appropriate reaction. The chill of destiny, the shudder of fate. This was a line, a famous beat in a famous story, the part where the chosen boy feels the cold hand of prophecy on his neck and understands that he and the Dark Lord are bound together, two halves of one terrible coin, brother wands, brother fates, the whole grand inevitable machine. Harry looked at the wand. He looked at Ollivander, who was practically vibrating with the gravity of it, and Harry started to laugh. It started small and got away from him, the way the good laughs did, until he had to put a hand on the counter to stay upright, and Ollivander's expression curdled from awe into pure baffled offense. Sorry, it's just, Harry wiped his eyes. The same bird. You're telling me the same bird, one bird, two feathers, plucked I assume on the same Tuesday, and one feather went into the wand of the most evil wizard of the age, and the other one's been sitting in a box in your shop for 50 years waiting for me, and that's supposed to feel like fate. He held the wand up, turned it in the gold-dusted light, grinning at it like an old friend. Buddy, that's not fate, that's a supply chain. That's one bird and a guy with a good filing system. You know what it actually means that my wand and his wand came from the same bird? It means we shop at the same store, that's it. That's the whole cosmic connection. We have the same wand guy. Mr. Potter, Ollivander said faintly, I don't think you appreciate. Oh, I appreciate it. It's a great wand. 10 out of 10 would channel magic again. You do beautiful work and the phoenix can be proud. Harry set a stack of gold on the counter, more than the wand cost, because the man did beautiful work. But here's the thing, I'm gonna need everybody in this story to internalize early, and you're the first one who gets the speech, so congratulations. He leaned in and the comedy didn't leave his face, but something underneath it went steady and old and certain. Everybody keeps handing me a destiny like it's a coat that has to fit. The brother wands, the chosen one, the boy who lived, and I keep telling them the same thing and they keep not hearing it, so let's practice. The wand didn't choose me, Mr. Ollivander, I chose the wand. It's a tool, a gorgeous, warm, sparky tool, and I'm going to use the hell out of it, and the day it stops being useful I'll go buy a different one and feel nothing. Because I'm not the chosen one, I'm just the one who showed up, and there's a difference and the whole world's about to learn it. He pocketed the wand, he picked up his shopping. At the door he paused and looked back at the old man standing pale among his 1,000 boxes of certainties. For what it's worth, Harry added, gentler, you do remember my parents' wands, willow and mahogany. That's a kind thing to carry around for someone. Thank you for that. And he meant that one too, both of them at once, the kindness and the defiance, because that was the whole trick of being him. You could mock the cathedral and still be glad somebody built it. Outside, the alley had gone gold with late afternoon. Hagrid found him there, considerably more cheerful than he'd been at the bank, carrying a cage with a snowy owl in it. Happy birthday, Harry, thought you might like her. And the coal in Harry's chest did its dangerous cracking thing again, because nobody had given him a birthday present he could remember in either of his lives. And now a giant had bent a shotgun into a balloon animal and baked him a misspelled cake and bought him an owl, and Harry decided privately that if anyone ever tried to hurt Rubius Hagrid they would discover precisely how creative an immortal man could be. She's perfect, he said, and meant it, and the owl regarded him with the same flat judgment as the delivery owl, which he was beginning to understand was just an owl's resting expression. Hedwig, we're calling her Hedwig, don't ask. I read it in a book today and it stuck. That night in a rented room above the leaky cauldron, in a back corner of his skull where the cold draft had first slid across his scar, a thread of something old and patient was already at work. In a dim room far away or near, distance meaning little to a thing that no longer had a body of its own, queerness, Quirrell knelt and reported to the second face beneath his turban, the ruined whisper of a thing that had once been the most feared wizard alive. He laughed, my lord, Quirrell breathed. At the wand maker, at the bank he charmed the goblins, at the alley he insulted Malfoy, he treated all of it as a joke. The boy who survived you, he behaves as though nothing can touch him. There was a silence, and then the whisper when it came was thoughtful in a way that should have reassured no one. Nothing can touch him, it repeated softly. He behaves as though nothing can touch him. A long pause. Children behave so when they have never been hurt or when they cannot be. The whisper considered the difference and found it interesting, and a cold appetite woke in it that had been asleep for 10 years. I felt his scar burn against your hand, Quirrell. The connection lives. We will learn which kind of child he is, and if it is the second kind. The whisper did something that in a living throat might have been a smile. Then the boy is not a problem, he is an opportunity. Watch him, bring me the stone, and let the unkillable child come to us. To the north, in his circular office, Albus Dumbledore stood at his window with his hands folded behind his back and a small silver instrument cooling on the desk, its hairline crack now run all the way around. On the desk also sat reports, one from an old wandmaker who had owled unprompted and uneasy to say that the Potter boy had reacted to the Brother Wand revelation by laughing. One relayed through quieter channels that Lucius Malfoy had been seen leaving Nocturne Alley looking for the first time in living memory rattled, and a third from Madame Malkins that the boy who lived had reduced the Malfoy heir to silence and then inexplicably given him life advice. Dumbledore had spent 10 years building a plan around a particular kind of boy, a boy shaped by hardship into humility, a boy who would arrive at Hogwarts hungry for belonging, grateful for guidance, ready to be gently, lovingly, regretfully steered toward the role the world required of him. Dumbledore was not a cruel man, he told himself this often and mostly believed it. He was simply a man who could see the whole board, and who had made his peace long ago with the necessity of moving pieces across it for the greater good. The reports on his desk described a boy who had in a single afternoon charmed a goblin, alarmed a Malfoy, baffled a wandmaker, recruited his enemy's son, and announced to anyone who would listen that he intended to flip the board over. Dumbledore picked up a lemon sherbet, turned it over in his ancient fingers, and did not eat it. Well, he said at last, to the empty office, to the sleeping portraits, to the cracked silver instrument that had laughed at him. It seems the protection held, the boy lived. A small, tired, genuinely curious smile moved through his beard. I had simply assumed I would recognize him when he did. And on a springy bed on Privet Drive that night, a boy who was two men and no one's peace sat with a wand in one hand and an owl on the bedpost, and made a list, an actual list, in the careful block capitals of a man who'd planned a great many operations of every rule he intended to break in order for maximum effect. It was a long list. He was, after all, very good at his job. He'd had 2 whole lifetimes of practice. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Unkillable Chaos. The barrier at King's Cross was a brick pillar between platforms 9 and 10, and the trick, a passing red-headed woman explained loudly to her brood of red-headed children, was to walk straight at it without stopping or being scared. Harry, who had spent 2 lifetimes walking straight at things without stopping or being scared, found this advice redundant but charming and went through at a dead sprint with his trolley, partly to test the magic and partly because if there was a chance the barrier was solid, he wanted to find out at a speed that would make the healing factor interesting. The barrier was not solid. He came out the other side onto a platform wreathed in steam, under a wrought iron sign that read Platform 9 and 3/4, beside a scarlet steam engine that looked like it had been designed by someone who loved trains more than physics. Okay, he said to Hedwig, who rode the trolley with the serenity of management. Now that's a train. He found a compartment, hauled his trunk up with arms that were already, after a month of push-ups and a healing factor that upgraded as it repaired, suspiciously strong for an 11-year-old, and had barely sat down before the door slid open, and a freckled boy with a smudge on his nose asked if he could sit there, everywhere else being full. It's a free country and a magic train, sit wherever your heart desires, Harry said, and that was how he met Ron Weasley, who turned out to be the 6th son of the loud red-headed family, sweet and loyal and chronically convinced he was nobody, which Harry recognized instantly because he had recently been nobody himself in a cupboard and had strong feelings about people being made to feel like extras in their own lives. You're really him. Ron breathed when the scar came up, which it did because it always did. Harry Potter, so you remember you've actually got the scar? Yeah, want to hear something nobody knows? Harry leaned in, conspiratorial, and Ron leaned in too, eyes wide. I don't remember a single thing about that night. I was 1. My most vivid memory from age 1 is being 1, so everybody's built this whole legend on the testimony of a guy whose main skill at the time was drooling. He sat back. Don't tell anyone, it'll ruin the merchandise. Ron laughed, a startled, delighted laugh, the laugh of a kid who'd expected a hero and gotten a person, and somewhere in that laugh a friendship installed itself, quick and total, the way they do at 11. They were joined over the next hour by an escalating cast, a round-faced boy who'd lost his toad, a bossy girl with bushy hair and an alarming quantity of memorized textbook named Hermione Granger, who arrived mid-sentence and stayed to interrogate Harry about whether the stories about him were true, and whom Harry liked immediately because she asked, "How do you know that about everything?" which was the only question that had ever mattered to him. "You'll be brilliant here," he told her while she was still mid-suspicion. "You asked the right question. Everybody else in this world asks, what's the spell? You ask, why does the spell work? That's the whole game. Stick with me, Granger. We're gonna break things that have never been broken." "I don't break things," Hermione said, scandalized. "I learn the rules." "Same thing," said Harry. "You just have to learn them well enough." And then the door slid open one more time, and Draco Malfoy stood in it, flanked by two boys built like furniture, his pale face arranged into the sneer he'd been practicing in mirrors his whole life, and his eyes found Harry, and the sneer flickered because the last time these two had met, Harry had clapped him on the shoulder and called his entire upbringing a pyramid scheme. "So it's true," Draco said, recovering the drawl. "Harry Potter's on the train. And he's already fallen in with," his lip curled at Ron's second-hand robes, "the wrong sort. I can help you there, Potter. I can show you which families are worth knowing." The compartment went tense, Ron went red, Hermione drew breath to deliver a lecture, Harry just smiled. "Junior, good to see you. Did you bully your dad into the racing broom?" Draco's mouth opened, closed. "He said first years aren't allowed brooms." "Course he did, listen." Harry's voice was friendly, almost gentle, and somehow that was worse than mockery. "Here's the thing about your offer. You're standing in a doorway telling a guy who came back from being nobody which people are worth knowing. And I want you to really sit with how that's going to age, because I've got a feeling about this year, Draco. I've got a feeling some things are about to get reorganized. And when the dust settles, the kids who spent first year sorting people into worth knowing and not, they're gonna look around and realize they spent the whole time auditioning for a club that was always going to look down on them too." He shrugged. "Or you sit down, lose the goons, and find out what it's like to be liked for something other than your last name. Doors open, both doors, your call." For a long moment, Draco Malfoy stood frozen in the doorway, the two slabs of muscle behind him shifting uncertainly, the whole pureblood script he'd been handed at birth grinding against a thing it had no answer for, which was a person treating him like he had options. Then he turned and left without a word, but he left slowly, and he didn't slam the door, and Harry marked it down, seed planted, watering later, and turned back to his new friends. "You're not what I expected," Ron said, a little awed. "Buddy," said Harry, "you have no idea. Get comfortable. It's gonna be a weird 7 years." The castle, when they came to it across the Black Lake in a fleet of little boats, was so beautiful that even Harry shut up for a second. It stood on a cliff against a sky thick with stars, 1,000 windows lit gold, towers stacked on towers in a way that suggested the architect had also believed in physics less than feelings. Hagrid led the first years up to it through the dark, and into a hall, and a stern witch in emerald robes, Professor McGonagall, the name went round in whispers, met them at the top of a marble staircase and explained in a voice that brooked precisely zero nonsense that they would shortly be sorted into one of 4 houses, and that the houses were like a family and that triumphs would earn points and rule-breaking would lose them. She said rule-breaking at us specifically, the red voice noted. "I think she can smell us." The sorting happened in the Great Hall, under a ceiling bewitched to mirror the night sky before the entire school and a long table of teachers, and Harry spotted Quirrell up there in his turban, and the cold draft brushed his scar across the whole length of the hall, and he gave the man a cheerful little wave that made him flinch into his goblet. The sorting itself was done by a hat. An actual hat, ancient and patched and frayed, which McGonagall set on each child's head in turn, and which, after a moment of apparent thought, shouted out the name of a house. Harry watched it work its way through a dozen children. It took anywhere from a second to a minute. It seemed to consider, to weigh, to occasionally argue, and when McGonagall called Potter, Harry. The entire hall went silent and craned forward to watch the boy who lived be sorted. Harry walked up, sat down, and let her lower the hat over his eyes. There was a long, long pause. "Oh," said a small voice in his ear, and it sounded genuinely unsettled, which was apparently not a thing the sorting hat was used to feeling. "Oh my, oh, this is, what are you? There are 2 of you in here. No, there's one of you, but you're wearing another one like a coat. You've died. You remember dying. You're not 11, you're, good heavens, the mileage on you, and underneath it all there's a little boy who lived in a cupboard, and you've put your arms around him, and you won't let me anywhere near him." "Yeah, that part's not on the table," Harry murmured. "The kid's off limits, to you, to the dark guy, to everybody. House me however you want, but the kid stays in the safe." "But where do I put you?" the hat fretted. "You're brave to the point of being a public hazard, Gryffindor, clearly, but you're cunning enough to terrify me, that Slytherin, and you've got a mind that takes things apart to see what they're for, which is Ravenclaw, and underneath the entire performance you're loyal to a fault. You'd burn down the world for the people you've decided are yours, and that's the most Hufflepuff thing I have felt in 1,000 years. You're all for, you don't have a house, you have a hostage situation." "Okay. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Look." Harry settled in, hands folded, the way he used to settle in across a negotiating table. "I'm gonna make this easy for both of us because you're clearly having a day. You want to put me somewhere I'll cause the maximum interesting amount of trouble while being near the people I already like. I've got a redhead and a bushy-haired genius I'm partial to, and I have it on good authority the whole Chosen One apparatus expects me in red and gold so they can keep an eye on me. So here's my counteroffer." He smiled under the brim. "Put me wherever annoys the most powerful people in this castle the least amount that I can get away with so they relax, so they stop watching so hard. Put me where they expect me. Make them comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes." There was a silence from the hat that could only be described as professional respect. "You," it said slowly, "are going to be a catastrophe, and I want you to know I tried to warn them." And then aloud to the breathless hall, "Gryffindor," the red and gold table erupted. Harry stood, tossed the hat a little salute, and went to sit with Ron and a pair of identical red-headed twins who were already chanting, "We got Potter." And an older brother trying to look dignified about it, and across the hall a pale boy at the Slytherin table watched him with an expression that wasn't quite a sneer anymore. And up at the staff table an old man with a long white beard and half-moon spectacles set down his goblet and looked at Harry Potter for a long, thoughtful, unhurried moment. Harry caught the look, held it, and winked. Albus Dumbledore did not wink back. But something at the corner of his mouth moved, and he picked up his goblet again, and Harry understood that the real game had, at last, both players at the board. What followed was the part the rest of the school would talk about for years. Because the thing about a castle full of casual, ancient, barely supervised magic is that it is, for a normal 11-year-old, a place of constant low-grade peril, moving staircases that strand you, doors that aren't doors, a poltergeist who drops things, a caretaker's cat that reports you, suits of armor that swing if you're rude. For most first years, the first month is a process of learning through 100 small frights where the danger is. Harry Potter walked through all of it like a man strolling through a haunted house he found delightful. The moving staircases tried to strand him. He rode them like surfboards, whooping, and figured out their pattern in 3 days by the simple method of mapping every shift on a stolen bit of parchment, which no student had apparently ever thought to do because students were busy being scared. Within a week, he could root across the castle faster than the prefects. Peeves the poltergeist dropped a water balloon on his head. Harry looked up, dripping, grinned, and started applauding, told Peeves it was great work, real commitment to the craft. Have you considered ammunition with more structural integrity? And by the end of the month, the poltergeist who tormented the entire school had adopted Harry as a beloved menace in training and would drop things on people Harry pointed at, which was a power no first year had ever held. In charms, he made a feather fly on the first try, then asked Professor Flitwick why the incantation mattered if the wand movement and intent were doing the actual work, then demonstrated by making the feather fly while saying the wrong word entirely, just to watch the tiny professor fall off his stack of books in delight and alarm. In Transfiguration, he turned a match into a needle, then turned the needle back into a match, then into a slightly different match, then asked McGonagall whether Transfiguration was changing the thing or changing everyone's agreement about the thing, a question that made her sit down and look at him for a long moment and then assign him, very deliberately, extra reading to keep that mind occupied before it occupies itself. And in Potions, on the first day, Severus Snape, a hook-nosed man in black who moved through the dungeons like a draft and who clearly hated Harry on sight for reasons that had to do with a face Harry had inherited and never chosen, tried to humiliate him in front of the class with a barrage of questions no first year could answer. "Potter," Snape said softly, the whole dungeon gone silent and cold. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Honestly." "A nap, probably. That's the draft of living death you're showing off." Harry hadn't even looked up from setting out his scales. "Asphodel's a lily, wormwood's bitter, the whole thing's a poetry pun. I bitterly regret your death. It's basically a Victorian condolence card you can drink." Next, the dungeon held its breath. Snape's black eyes narrowed to slits. "Where," he said even more softly, "would you look if I asked you to find me a bezoar, stomach of a goat? It's a stone, it cures most poisons, which is a fun fact I've already decided to keep on me personally at all times, because I read your syllabus and you teach poison to children, which is a choice." Harry finally looked up and met the hatred in Snape's eyes with something that wasn't fear and wasn't even defiance, but a kind of warm, terrible understanding. "You hate me because I look like my dad and you've got some history there I haven't earned and don't deserve, and that's a you thing, Professor, and I'm not going to play the scared first-year part you've scripted for me. But I read your book cover to cover and it's good and you clearly know more about this than anyone in the castle, so here's my counter. Teach me the dangerous stuff, the real stuff. I'll be the best student you ever had on one condition." He smiled. "You stop pretending the disappointment is about me." The silence after that was so complete that someone's cauldron somewhere dripped. Snape said nothing for a long moment, then in a voice like a closing crypt, "Detention, Potter, for cheek tonight." But he assigned no points lost, and when Harry served the detention that night, scrubbing cauldrons without complaint, asking sharp questions about the dark theory behind the curriculum, Snape answered them grudgingly, brilliantly, and a strange and prickly and genuine apprenticeship began in the dungeons that neither of them would ever admit to. The evenings were where the real magic happened, and none of it was on the curriculum. By the third week, a particular corner of the Gryffindor common room had become, without anyone deciding it, Harry's corner, a deep armchair by the fire where he'd sprawl with a stack of library books and a running commentary, and where, over the course of an autumn, a small strange court assembled itself. Ron, with the wizard's chess, said he could beat anyone alive at. Hermione, who had stopped pretending she didn't want to sit with the boys and now arrived each night with a fortress of homework and the relief of someone who'd finally found people who didn't mind that she was the smartest person in the room. Neville, who'd started hovering at the edge of the corner and whom Harry had simply decisively absorbed. Longbottom, sit down, you're making the furniture nervous, until the round-faced boy who flinched at his own shadow began slowly to unfold. Harry held court there the way he'd once run a team, which was to say he ran it by making everyone in it feel like the most capable version of themselves. He had Hermione teach the others, because the fastest way to make a lonely genius bloom was to make her indispensable. He played chess against Ron and lost on purpose, just often enough to keep it real and just rarely enough that Ron never caught him, because a boy with 6 older brothers needed to be the best at something in front of an audience that mattered. He drew Neville out about plants. Neville, it turned out, loved herbology with a quiet ferocity nobody had ever asked about, and within a month Neville was correcting a 7th year about the properties of mandrake and not even apologizing for it. You're doing a thing, Hermione accused him one night over a charms essay, narrowing her eyes across the firelight. With all of us, you're managing us, building us up. I've been watching. Course I am. Harry didn't look up from his book. Is it working? Yes, Hermione admitted, infuriatingly. Then it's not a trick, it's just attention, he said. Here's the secret, Granger, since you caught me. 90% of people walk around their whole lives never once being looked at by someone who's actually paying attention. Teachers see a grade, parents see a kid, the world sees a function, almost nobody gets seen. He turned a page, so I look. I look hard at everybody and I tell them the true good thing I see, and it feels like magic, but it's just the cheapest, most available power in any world, and nobody uses it because everybody's too busy being scared of their own stuff. He glanced up, and for half a second the comedy thinned and something old and tired and warm showed through. I spent a long time being unlooked at in a cupboard. I know exactly what it costs, so I decided to be the guy who looks. That's the whole spell, Hermione. There's no incantation, you just decide somebody matters and then you act like it relentlessly until they start believing you. Hermione was quiet for a moment, then very quietly, nobody looked at me either. Before, they thought I was annoying. I know, Harry went back to his book, gentle. That's why you're in the good chair now, welcome to the corner. It's the best seat in the castle, and the rent is you have to let people be nice to you, which I know is the hardest thing in the world for smart kids who have been alone. Pay it anyway. He fixed things, too, from that corner, quietly the way he did everything. A first year being shaken down for sweets by a pair of older Slytherins found that the older Slytherins abruptly developed a deep disinterest in the sweet trade after a single pleasant, unhurried conversation with Harry in a corridor. A Hufflepuff girl crying over a cruel note found the note's author publicly, bafflingly compelled to apologize, with no fingerprints on the compulsion that anyone could prove. He never lost a point doing it, he never raised his voice. He simply noticed cruelty, and once Harry Potter had noticed a thing, the thing tended not to survive his attention. The castle began to feel, in small, unspoken ways, like a safer place than it had been, and almost no one could have told you exactly why, except that it had something to do with the boy in the good chair by the fire who seemed to see everything and forgot nothing and was, underneath all the jokes, the most relentlessly kind person any of them had ever met. And through all of it, the thing the school really whispered about, the thing that built the legend that would outlast Harry's actual deeds, was this: nothing the castle threw at him stuck. He fell off a moving staircase in the second week, a 40-foot drop onto stone, the kind of fall that should have ended an 11-year-old's school career and possibly his life. A dozen students saw it. He hit the flagstones with a crack that everyone heard, lay still for one horrible second while a Hufflepuff girl screamed, and then sat up, rolled his neck until it popped back into place, said, "Wow, okay, the landing's the hard part," and walked it off. By dinner, the story had grown 100 witnesses and 3 broken bones that had healed before he stood up. And Harry, asked about it, just shrugged and said the boy who lived was hard to kill, which was technically the official position and which he found hilarious. He drank a potion a jealous older student spiked with something nasty, he'd seen it done, let it happen curious, and spent 20 minutes being violently, comprehensively sick into a bin while his body chewed through the toxin and rebuilt whatever it had ruined. And then he wiped his mouth and went and found the older student and did not hurt him, just sat down next to him at his own table in front of his own friends and said quietly, "That would have killed a normal kid. I'm not going to report you, I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to remember you're the kind of guy who poisons children, and I'm going to be fascinated by you, and you're going to feel me being fascinated by you every single day until you transfer." The older student left for Beauxbatons at Christmas. It was funny, mostly. That was the thing about that first month, it was genuinely, riotously funny, a comedy of an immortal smartass loose in a school that ran on fear and tradition, and the students loved him and the teachers couldn't categorize him, and even McGonagall had been seen to smile. The flying lesson was where the legend got its wings, literally. Madam Hooch lined the first years up beside 2 rows of battered school brooms on a clear September afternoon and told them to stick out a hand and command the broom up. Most of the brooms rolled over or twitched. Harry's leapt into his palm like it had been waiting its whole splintery life for him, which the white voice attributed to confidence and zero fear response, and the red voice attributed to "we're just better, accept it." Then Neville, the round-faced boy, perpetually anxious, perpetually losing things, got nervous, kicked off too early, and shot 20 feet into the air on a broom that had clearly decided to commit a crime. He slid sideways, slipped off, and fell. Harry was already moving before the scream finished. Not on a broom, he didn't trust a system he'd known for 90 seconds with a kid's neck, but along the ground fast, the upgraded little body eating the distance, and he got under Neville and took the falling boy across both arms and let the impact drive him flat into the grass. Something in Harry's wrist snapped audibly. Neville landed safe and gasping. Harry lay in the grass, looked at his own wrist bending the wrong way, said "Ow, okay, rude," and watched it click itself straight while Madame Hooch sprinted over. "Potter, are you fine? Great." Wrist just expressing an opinion. He sat up, flexed the already mending hand, and grinned at Neville. "You okay, big guy? Good. For the record, that wasn't your fault. That broom's a death trap. It's got a warp in the handle. I felt it when I picked mine up." Somebody hands a kid faulty equipment and then yells at the kid. "That's a them problem." He helped Neville up. "You and me are gonna be friends, Longbottom. I've got a thing about people who get handed the bad broom and blamed for the crash." When Draco, smirking, snatched up the glass rememberall that had fallen from Neville's pocket and kicked off into the air to play keep away, Harry didn't lecture and didn't tattle. He simply walked over to Madame Hooch's own broom, picked it up, said "Be right back," and went up after Draco. First flight, no training, no fear, because the worst the sky could do was kill him, and the sky didn't know yet that didn't take. He flew like he'd been born to it, which the white voice noted was just what happened when you removed the part of a human being that flinched. He matched Draco turn for turn, came up under him grinning, and instead of demanding the rememberall, he simply said, conversationally, 50 feet up, "You know I can't fall, right? Saw the staircase thing? So you can throw that glass ball as far as you want, Junior, and I'll just keep coming forever because I have nothing else going on in a body that thinks gravity is a suggestion." Or he held out a hand, "You hand it back, we land, and you get to keep pretending today went how you wanted." Draco threw the rememberall as hard as he could away across the grounds out of pure spite. Harry went after it in a 60-foot screaming dive, caught it a foot off the ground, pulled up, and landed in front of a thunderstruck Professor McGonagall who had watched the entire thing from a window. He braced for the detention. Instead, McGonagall, after a long, conflicted, scandalized silence, marched him not to her office but to the Gryffindor Quidditch captain and the word seeker and youngest in a century got said, and Harry, who still didn't fully know the rules of the sport, found himself the newest member of the house team, mostly because no one in the history of the school had ever caught anything in a 60-foot dive on their first flight and lived to be praised for it. "I keep getting rewarded for surviving things," he told Ron that night, baffled and delighted. "This whole society's reward system is just did you not die? Congratulations, I'm gonna clean up here." But the night the trio became a trio was Halloween, and it involved a troll. Hermione had been crying in a bathroom. Ron had said something thoughtless, the way 11-year-old boys do, and she'd heard it, the way bright, lonely kids always do, and she'd missed the announcement that a 12-foot mountain troll had somehow gotten into the castle and the whole school was being herded to safety. Harry did the math in about half a second. Hermione alone didn't know, and trolls were a thing he had no spell for and absolutely a plan for. "She doesn't know," he said to Ron, and turned and ran toward the danger, which Ron, to his eternal credit and against every instinct, did too. They found the troll in the girls' bathroom, a mountain of gray muscle and stink swinging a club the size of Ron through the sinks, with Hermione pressed into a corner, white-faced and silent with the particular stillness of someone who has decided this is how they die. Harry did not raise his wand. He'd read 3 books on trolls in September because of course he had, and knew that their skulls were thick, their tempers short, and their attention spans roughly that of a furious toddler. So he did the most Wade Wilson thing available. He made himself the most interesting object in the room. "Hey, ugly, over here." He vaulted onto a sink, waving his arms, and pitched a metal soap dispenser off the troll's head with a clang that turned the great dim eyes toward him. "Yeah, you Shrek, that's right, Granger, when it comes at me. You and Ron get to the door, do not argue, go, come on, big guy, you want the loud one. Everybody always wants the loud one." The troll roared and swung. Harry dropped flat as the club demolished the sink he'd stood on, came up inside the thing's reach where the club couldn't follow, and rather than fight 12 feet of muscle with an 11-year-old's strength, he redirected it, snatched up the fallen club's leather wrist strap, looped it around the troll's own ankle as it staggered, and yanked. Physics, not magic. The troll, mid-swing and off balance, took its own legs out and went down like a felled tower, and its head met the stone rim of a sink with a bonk that shook plaster from the ceiling and dropped it cold. In the ringing silence, Ron's wand was still half raised. Hermione was staring. Harry sat on the unconscious troll's back, breathing hard, and grinned at her. "Granger, how you okay?" "You," Hermione's voice came out very small. "You didn't use a single spell." "No." "Read a book, used a strap, let it fall on its own dumb head. Magic's great, but 90% of every fight is just making the other guy's size work against him, and that's the same in every world I've been in." He hopped down. "Also, you weren't crying because you're weak, you were crying because somebody made you feel small, and those are different, and the second one is curable, and step 1 of the cure is realizing you just stood in a corner staring down a mountain troll without making a sound. That's not panic, that's nerve. You've got nerve, Granger, we're gonna need it." When McGonagall arrived and demanded to know what had happened, it was Hermione, rule-following, teacher-pleasing Hermione, who stepped forward and lied through her teeth, said she'd gone looking for the troll herself, thought she could handle it, and that Harry and Ron had saved her. She lost points for it and didn't care, and from that moment the three of them were welded together, because there are friendships that take years and there are friendships forged in the specific crucible of lying to a professor about a troll, and the second kind never come apart. You didn't have to take the blame, Harry told her later by the common room fire. You ran toward a troll for someone who'd been horrible about you all month, Hermione said, hugging her knees. I never even said a nice word to you. Yeah, well, Harry poked the fire. The comedy went quiet for one beat, the way he allowed it exactly once per night. I spent a long time being the person nobody ran toward. I made a decision a while back that I was going to be the guy who runs toward people. It's the only part of any of this I'm completely serious about. He looked up and the grin came back. Don't tell anyone, it'll ruin the merchandise. There was defense against the dark arts too, where Harry sat in the front row of Quirrell's reeking, garlic-strung classroom and made the man sweat through his turban with nothing but eye contact and the occasional bright, friendly, impossible question. Professor, hypothetically, if a wizard had no body of his own, what would he need to get one, asking for a project? And felt the cold draft slide across his scar each time and watched Quirrell's hands shake and built the file one tremor at a time. He knew now with certainty what wore the turban. He was simply waiting to understand the rest of the board before he made his move, because that was the difference between Wade Wilson and the version of Wade Wilson that got people he loved killed. This time he was doing the reading first. By late October the castle had reorganized itself around him without quite noticing. The students adored him. Neville stood a little straighter. Hermione had stopped raising her hand to be right and started raising it to be curious. Ron had a best friend who treated him like the most interesting person in any room. Even the Slytherins had quietly stopped a few of their crueler games because the Potter boy had a way of noticing cruelty that made it feel less like sport and more like a thing he was filing away for later. It was, against every expectation including his own, a good autumn, the best either of his lives had ever offered him. Which was, of course, exactly when somebody decided to find out if he could die. But there was one night it stopped being funny, and Harry would think about that night for a long time. It was late October. He'd been tracking the Quirrell problem the way he tracked everything, patiently building the file, and he'd noticed the cold draft across his scar getting more frequent, more deliberate, like something testing a lock. And one night, walking back from a midnight reconnaissance of the third-floor corridor everyone had been so weirdly forbidden from entering, he was attacked. He never saw what cast it. A curse out of the dark, hitting him square in the back, a curse he'd later learn was meant to stop a heart. It stopped his. He felt it stop, felt the lights go out from the bottom up, felt himself fall, felt the cold flagstones against his cheek, and the absolute, total silence of a body with no engine running. And then the healing factor woke up. This was the part that wasn't funny, because dying didn't hurt, dying was easy, dying was a thing he'd done before and was honestly pretty good at, but coming back was not the gentle knitting of a paper cut. Coming back from death was the engine reaching down into the dark after him and dragging him up by the spine, restarting a heart that had quit, forcing breath into lungs that had given up. And it was vast and ancient and utterly without mercy, a thing that had decided in another life that this collection of cells was not allowed to stop and would enforce that ruling against death itself, against Harry's own exhausted will, against everything. For one cold, baroque, terrible second he felt it as something other than himself, a tireless cosmic patience wearing his body like a glove, indifferent to whether he wanted to come back, only that he would, and he understood, lying on the flagstones with his heart slamming back into rhythm, exactly why every torturer who'd ever learned what he was had stopped looking awed and started looking afraid. He got up. He stood in the cold, dark corridor, alive again, alone, and for once he didn't have a joke. Whoever that was, the white voice said very quietly, knew the killing curse alone wouldn't be enough, so they used something subtler, something that stops the heart and looks like natural causes. That is not a student. That is someone who already suspects what we are and is gathering data. Someone is running tests on us. Yeah, Harry said softly, to the dark, to the cold, to the thing behind Quirrell's turban that he was now certain had pulled the trigger. The comedy was gone from his voice entirely, and what was left was the thing underneath it, the thing the Sorting Hat had glimpsed and recoiled from, old and level and without any fear in it at all. Yeah, somebody's running tests. He looked up the corridor toward the forbidden third floor, toward the staff tower, toward the whole patient apparatus of old men and dark lords who had spent his entire life arranging him on a board. Okay, he said, test acknowledged, results pending. And he smiled, and it was not a nice smile, and somewhere far away a wraith felt the boy's scar go cold and certain and interested, and for the first time in 10 years a thing that had once been Lord Voldemort felt something it had genuinely forgotten how to feel. It felt watched. In the staff tower, Albus Dumbledore was awake, as he often was, and a portrait had come to tell him in a hushed and frightened voice what it had seen in the corridor below: a boy struck dead by a curse in the dark, and a boy standing up again as though death were a misunderstanding to be cleared up later. Dumbledore sat for a long time after the portrait left. He had known, of course, that Lily's protection had saved the boy as an infant. He had built 10 years of careful plans on the understanding that the boy was protected, special, destined. He had not built any plans at all on the possibility that the boy could simply not be killed, that the central load-bearing assumption of the entire prophecy, the grim necessity that one of them must eventually die, might not apply to a child who treated his own death as a brief administrative inconvenience. If neither can live while the other survives, Dumbledore murmured to the dark office, to the phoenix dozing on its perch, to the cracked silver instrument that had laughed at him in August, and one of them cannot die. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. He was a man who could see the whole board, and he had just realized, with the cold clarity of a master watching a single unaccounted-for piece, that he no longer knew what game he was playing. Down in the dark, in the body of a stammering professor, the wraith of Lord Voldemort came to the same conclusion and reached the opposite emotion. Where Dumbledore felt dread, the Dark Lord felt the first stirring of a terrible, hungry hope. An unkillable enemy was a catastrophe. An unkillable body, the whisper thought, turning the idea over like a jewel, a body that could not die, that the cruelest magic in the world could not stop, was the single most valuable object in the world to a thing that had spent 10 years of smoke. Watch him, Voldemort breathed to his servant in the dark, and do not kill him again. We have learned what we needed to learn. The cold appetite uncoiled, patient now, sir. The boy cannot die. How wonderful, how very, very wonderful. And so by Halloween, the central fact of Harry Potter's second life was established beyond any doubt. In every quarter that mattered, he could not be killed. The students made it a legend. The teachers made it a worry. Dumbledore made it a crisis, and Voldemort made it a plan. Only Harry made it a punchline, and only Harry understood that a punchline, delivered correctly with perfect timing by a man with nothing to lose and nothing to fear, was the single most dangerous weapon ever brought into a war. He just hadn't decided yet exactly how to fire it. He was, after all, still doing his reading. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Mocking the prophecy. Christmas at Hogwarts emptied the castle of nearly everyone, which suited Harry, because empty castles were where the interesting things got left lying around. He stayed because Privet Drive was not a place he intended to spend a holiday, and because Ron stayed, and the two of them had a Christmas that the old Harry cupboard Harry, the boy who'd watched Dudley open 37 presents, would not have believed. A fire, a feast, a chess set, and on Christmas morning a small pile of gifts at the foot of Harry's bed, the first he could remember receiving in either life. A lumpy maroon sweater from Ron's mother, who had never met him and had knitted him into her family anyway, which did the dangerous thing to the coal in his chest. A wooden flute from Hagrid, a box of chocolates from Hermione. And last, wrapped in nothing with no tag, a fold of fabric that poured through his fingers like water made of shadow and starlight, and a note in a thin, looping, unsigned hand. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. Harry held the cloak up, and it swallowed his arm to the elbow, and the arm simply wasn't there anymore. Invisibility, the white voice said, and there was for once no irony in it at all. An invisibility cloak. Do you understand what we have just been handed? This is the single most useful object in any covert operation ever conceived. And it arrived anonymously from someone who had it in their possession, on the one night we'd be alone in a castle full of secrets. Somebody wants me to go exploring, Harry murmured, turning the note over. No signature, but the handwriting was old and the phrasing was careful and the timing was surgical. Somebody very smart wants me to feel like exploring was my idea. He smiled, and it wasn't entirely a nice smile. That's the most flattering thing anyone's done to me yet. He's not ordering me around. He's setting out a trail of breadcrumbs and trusting me to be the kind of kid who follows breadcrumbs into a dark forest. He folded the cloak. Joke's on him, I love dark forests. I'm just gonna walk through this one knowing exactly who scattered the bread. He went exploring that night because of course he did, and because refusing the bait entirely would have told the baker as much as taking it, and a good operator never let the other side learn which of his moves were free. The cloak draped over his shoulders erased him from the world. He drifted through the sleeping castle like a rumor, past the snoring portraits and the prowling cat, and let his feet wander, half following the breadcrumbs and half following his own nose for the parts of a building people didn't want you in. He found the room by accident or by design. It was getting harder to tell the difference, which he supposed was the whole point of a man like Dumbledore. An abandoned classroom, furniture stacked against the walls, and standing alone in the center of the cold stone floor tall as the ceiling, a magnificent mirror in an ornate gold frame carved across the top with words that read, once he sounded them out backward, I show not your face but your heart's desire. The white voice cataloged it instantly, a mirror that shows what you want most, in an empty room. On the night we were given a cloak and pointed at the castle's secrets, Harry, this is a test. He wants to see what we want, he wants to read us. Whatever this mirror shows, he will be watching to learn it. Yeah, Harry said softly and stepped in front of the glass anyway because you couldn't decline every test and stay an unknown quantity. Sometimes the most confusing thing you could do was take the test and turn in a blank page. He looked into the mirror of Arist, the mirror that had stopped grown wizards in their tracks, that had shown the lonely a family and the poor a fortune and the grieving their beloved dead, the mirror that knew the shape of the deepest wanting in any heart that stood before it. And Harry Potter looked into it and saw himself, just himself, an 11-year-old boy in a borrowed cloak, scar on his forehead, looking back. No parents standing behind him with their hands on his shoulders, though he knew, with an ache he allowed himself for exactly one breath, that was what the old Harry would have seen, that the boy whose body this was had wanted nothing in the world so much as a mother and a father and a hand on the shoulder. No army at his back, No throne, no revenge, no peace, just him, awake, whole himself. He stood there a long time in the cold, and the comedy was entirely gone, and what was left was a thing he didn't have a joke for. Because the mirror showed your heart's deepest desire, and Harry's heart looked into the most powerful longing glass ever made and produced nothing it could offer. He didn't want the dead back, he'd been dead, it wasn't a place you visited, it was just off. He didn't want power, he had more than he knew what to do with, and it bored him. He didn't want to win, not really, not the way the script wanted him to want it. The deepest desire of a man who had lived twice and died once and could not be killed turned out to be the one thing a mirror could never conjure. He just wanted to be himself on his own terms, unmoved and unmovable, the author of his own absurd story instead of a character in someone else's grim one. And the mirror, faced with a desire it could not fulfill, could only show him the thing he already was. Huh, Harry said very quietly to the glass. That's the saddest superpower in the world, you know that. You show people the one thing they'll never have and you let them stand here and starve in front of it. He reached out and touched the cold surface and his reflection touched it back. Whoever you've trapped in front of you over the years, I hope somebody came and pulled them away before it ate them. That's a real thing a mirror can do to a lonely person. I've seen what wanting does. It has driven men mad, said a voice from the shadows, gentle and old and unsurprised. Yes, it is a dangerous thing to sit before the mirror of Arist. Harry did not jump. He'd known he wasn't alone since he'd entered the room. There'd been a warmth in the dark, a sense of being attended to, the specific feeling of a very patient man waiting for a younger one to reach the interesting part. He turned, and there in the corner, seated on a stacked desk as comfortably as a throne, half-moon spectacles catching the moonlight, sat Albus Dumbledore. Headmaster, Harry said. Nice cloak you sent me, real quality. You've had it in your possession a while, the note said. Funny, my dad's been dead 10 years and you've been sitting on his invisibility cloak the whole time and you decided tonight was the night to give it back. The same night you happened to be here, at this mirror. He smiled. You don't do anything by accident, do you? Not one single thing in 10 years. Something moved in Dumbledore's blue eyes, not guilt, Harry noted. The man was far past guilt, but a flicker of pure, delighted, terrible interest, the look of a chess master whose opponent has just made a move he genuinely did not predict. And what did you see, Harry? Dumbledore asked softly, ignoring the accusation the way the very powerful ignore weather. When you looked into the glass, many would not say. But I find you are not many. You first, Harry said. It's your mirror, your trap, your Christmas Eve. What do you see, Albus? Big, powerful man, end of a long life, the whole wizarding world calling you the greatest wizard alive. What does a guy like you want so bad he'd never say it out loud? He tilted his head. Socks. Dumbledore went very still. Yeah, Harry said gently, watching the old man's face. Not socks, something you did, something you can't undo. Someone you lost or hurt or failed way back before any of us were born, and you spent the rest of your life trying to balance the books on it by being so wise and so good and so necessary that nobody ever looks too hard at the kind of man who's comfortable arranging children on a board for the greater good. He let that land. He wasn't guessing, not entirely. He'd read this man for 4 months in every careful gift and every distant test, and the shape of an old guilt was the easiest shape in the world for an old soldier to recognize. I'm not gonna ask what it was. Everybody's allowed their cupboard. I just want you to know I can see the door. For a long moment the great Albus Dumbledore said nothing at all, and the moonlight lay cold on the floor between them, and the mirror behind Harry showed 2 figures, an old man and a boy, neither of their reflections quite matching the men who stood there. You are, Dumbledore said at last, and his voice had lost its comfortable, twinkling distance and gone quiet and real, not at all the boy I prepared for. No, Harry agreed, I'm really not. And here's the part where I save us both some time, because you're gonna spend the next 6 years trying to figure out how to steer me, and I respect the effort, so I'll give you the answer for free. He walked toward the old man, small and certain in his dead father's cloak. You can't, not because I'm strong though I am, and not because I'm clever though I'm that too. You can't steer me because the one lever you've got, the lever you use on everybody, the lever you used on me for 10 years in a cupboard, is fear of death. You make people afraid of dying or of someone they love dying, and then you point them at the thing that scares them and call it destiny. He stopped in front of Dumbledore. And I'm not afraid of dying, Albus. I've done it. It's nothing. It's a Tuesday. Which means your whole machine, the prophecy, the chosen one, the noble sacrifice you've probably already got penciled in for me somewhere down the line, none of it has a single part that fits me. You built a beautiful lock, I'm just not a key. The phoenix would not arrive for some minutes yet. The stone was still safe in its chamber, the wraith beneath the turban was still patient. For now there was only an old man and a boy in a cold room, and a mirror that had failed for the first time in centuries to show anyone a thing they could not have. Sit with me a moment, Harry, Albus Dumbledore said quietly. I think the time has come for me to tell you about a prophecy, and I think, for the first time in a very long time, that I genuinely do not know what you will do with it. Now that, said Harry and dropped onto a stacked desk beside the greatest wizard in the world like they were 2 guys at a bar, is the first honest thing you've said to me. Go on, tell me the script, I've been dying to read it. The prophecy, when Dumbledore recited it, was 16 lines of the sort of portentous fog that Harry had spent 2 lifetimes learning to distrust. It spoke of one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, born as the 7th month died, born to those who had thrice defied him. It said the Dark Lord would mark him as his equal. It said he would have a power the Dark Lord knew not. and it ended with the line that the whole wizarding world had apparently organized itself around like iron filings around a magnet. Neither can live while the other survives. Dumbledore finished and folded his hands and watched Harry's face with the still, total attention of a man who had wagered everything on a single card and was about to see it turned over. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he started gently to take the prophecy apart, and it was the most dangerous thing he'd done since arriving at Hogwarts, because he did it the way the White Voice did everything calmly, logically, one joint at a time, until there was nothing left to be afraid of. Okay, first problem, born as the seventh month dies to those who thrice defied him. Harry ticked it off on his fingers. That's me sure, end of July, parents who fought him 3 times. But it's also Neville Longbottom, born July 30th, parents who were Aurors, fought the guy plenty. You know, it's also Neville, so right off the top, your unbreakable prophecy can't even decide who it's about. It needed Voldemort to pick, and he picked me, and that's the only reason I'm the one. The prophecy didn't choose me. A paranoid murderer with bad reading comprehension chose me. That's not fate, that's a typo with a body count. Dumbledore's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Second problem, he will mark him as his equal. Everyone reads that as grand and cosmic, the scar, the bond, 2 great wizards locked in eternal blah blah. But it's not a prophecy of what'll happen, Albus, it's a description of a mistake he already made. He marked me, past tense, the night he failed to kill me. Prophecy is just narrating his screw-up back to him and dressing it up as destiny so everyone feels better about a baby surviving a war crime. He spread his hands. You've all been treating a record of one guy's bad night like it's a law of physics. And the last line, Harry, Dumbledore asked very softly. Neither can live while the other survives. Surely you cannot logic your way out of that. It is the heart of it. One of you must die. There is no version of the future in which you both simply continue. And here Harry began quietly to laugh, not the wild laugh of the wand shop, but a low, delighted, almost tender thing, because this was the trap at the center of the whole machine, and he'd seen the way out of it the very first night in a cupboard with a paper cut. Albus, he said. Albus, that line is the funniest thing anyone has ever said about me, and they've said a lot. Listen to it. Neither can live while the other survives. You've all read that as a death sentence. One of us has to kill the other. The great tragic necessity. The noble sacrifice you've been quietly planning to ask me for since I was 1 year old. Don't think I haven't clocked that, by the way, we'll circle back. He leaned in, eyes bright. But that line only works as a death sentence if I can die. The whole prophecy, the entire grim machine you and the dark guy have been feeding for a decade, runs on one unexamined assumption. That eventually, one way or another, Harry Potter is killable, that there's a future where I stop. The cold understanding spread across Albus Dumbledore's ancient face, and it was the first time in their conversation that Harry saw something there he recognized completely because he'd put it on 100 faces himself. The look of a master strategist realizing the board he'd been playing on had an extra dimension he'd never accounted for. And I don't, Harry said simply. I don't stop. You know what, your little silver instrument knew it in August. It cracked right down the middle and said boop. A curse stopped my heart in a corridor in October, and I got up and walked it off. The killing curse already failed on me once and everyone called it a miracle. I'm telling you it'll fail on me every single time because I am not the boy who lived, Albus. I'm the man who doesn't quit dying, and there is a difference, and it breaks your prophecy in half. He sat back, grinning. Neither can live while the other survives. I can't be killed, so Voldemort can never survive me because I never go away, and I refuse flatly, cheerfully, permanently refuse to stop living. Which means the prophecy doesn't get its tragic ending, it just runs forever. It's not a death sentence, it's a cancelled subscription, and nobody can make me resubscribe. For a long moment, the only sound in the cold room was the faint hum of the mirror that could not give anyone what they wanted. You're not going to play the part, Dumbledore said slowly. It was not a question. I'm not going to refuse the war either. That's the part you're about to misunderstand, so let me get ahead of it. Harry stood and the cloak settled around him and the moonlight caught his face, and for a second the boy was entirely gone and something older and steadier looked out of his green eyes. I'm not going to let him hurt people. I like people. I ran toward a troll for a girl who'd been horrible to me. I'll burn down the world for the redhead and the bushy-haired genius and the giant who baked me a cake. So yeah, Voldemort and I are gonna tangle. That part of your script I'll allow. But I'm not gonna do it your way. No noble sacrifice, no walking into the forest to die so the magic works, no chosen one martyrdom that lets you tell everyone afterward how tragic and necessary it all was. He smiled, and it was kind, and it was final. I'm gonna beat him stupid. I'm gonna beat him embarrassing. I'm gonna take the most feared wizard in the world and the most carefully laid plan of the most powerful wizard in the world, and I'm gonna throw them both in a blender and hit frap. And when it's over, nobody is going to be able to tell a single clean, noble, useful story about what happened, because clean, noble stories are how men like you keep moving men like me around the board, and I'm done being on the board. He picked up the corner of his cloak. I'm gonna win. I'm just gonna do it so weird that the win is useless to everybody who wanted to own it, starting with you. He walked to the door. At it he paused, the way he always did, and looked back at the greatest wizard of the age sitting alone in the cold beside a mirror full of failed wanting. For what it's worth, Harry said, and the warmth came back into his voice, both things at once, the defiance and the genuine care. You're not the villain, Albus. I know you think you might be on the bad nights. You're just a tired old man who saw the whole board so clearly for so long that you forgot the pieces were people. And you made some calls you can't take back, and now you're trying to spend the rest of your life balancing the ledger by being wise. I get it, I've got a ledger too. He smiled. But you left a baby in a cupboard for 10 years to make a weapon work, and the weapon woke up and it remembers. So here's my Christmas gift to you. Since you gave me my dad's cloak, I forgive you completely. No strings, and I'm never going to do a single thing you want me to. Merry Christmas, headmaster. The breadcrumbs were delicious. And he vanished, literally, the cloak swallowing him between one step and the next, and was gone, leaving Albus Dumbledore alone in the moonlight with a prophecy that had just been declared void by the one person it was about, and a slow, astonished, deeply unsettled smile spreading through his long white beard. Oh dear, the greatest wizard in the world said softly, to the empty room, to the useless mirror, to the cracked instrument 100 miles away that had tried to warn him. Oh dear, 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 I have made a terrible miscalculation. And I think, he added, and the smile was almost wondering now, almost glad, I think it may be the most interesting one of my life. Far below, in the dungeons of the same castle, on the same cold night, a different conversation was ending. Quirinus Quirrell knelt before nothing, before a cold draught, before the second face beneath his turban, and the wraith of Lord Voldemort listened to its servant's report of failure, the third-floor corridor still guarded, the stone still beyond reach, the great three-headed dog still in the way, with a patience that should have frightened Quirrell far more than rage would have. And the boy, the whisper asked. What of the unkillable boy? He laughs, my lord, he dismantles things. He looks at me and asks questions I cannot answer, and his scar burns against the back of my skull, and he knows, my lord, I am certain he knows what I carry. Of course he knows, Voldemort breathed almost fondly. He has known since the alley. He is not stupid, Quirinus, he's the opposite of stupid. He is the most dangerous kind of clever, the kind that does not respect a single rule. And do you know what that means? The whisper coiled with a terrible new appetite. It means he will come to us. A clever boy who fears nothing and breaks every rule, does not wait to be hunted. He investigates. He follows the breadcrumbs Dumbledore's mine. It makes no difference. He will follow them because he cannot help himself, because the one thing a creature like that cannot resist is finding out. The cold draft sharpened to a point. So we do not hunt him. We get the stone. We get my body back. And we make sure the path to the stone is one he cannot resist walking down. And when the unkillable boy stands before me at last, the whisper did the thing that was almost a smile. I will not try to kill him. I tried that. It does not take. No, I will offer him the only thing in all the world that a man who cannot die might actually want. And what is that, my lord? The wraith of Lord Voldemort considered the boy who laughed at death, the boy whose body could not be stopped, the body that was, to a thing made of smoke and hunger, the single most valuable object in existence. Company, it whispered. I will offer him company. Now bring me the stone, Quirinus. The most interesting year of my long life is about to begin. And in the Gryffindor common room, under a dying fire, a boy in an invisibility cloak sat very still for a long time, turning over everything he'd learned, building the file, mapping the board, both boards now, the old man's and the Dark Lord's, laid one over the other like two photographs in the same frame. Then Harry Potter smiled into the dark and pulled out a fresh bit of parchment and began in careful block capitals to write a plan so reckless and so stupid and so perfect that even the white voice went quiet, and the red voice, the reckless one, the one that had always wanted to pull the pin and see, said in a hush of pure adoration, oh, we are going to give them such a show. He told Ron and Hermione the next morning. Most of it anyway, the parts that were theirs to carry. They were the only 3 Gryffindors left in the castle, and they had the common room and a plate of leftover Christmas toast to themselves, and Harry laid it out the way he'd once laid out an operation for a team he'd mostly gotten killed, which was a memory he kept close precisely because it had taught him to do this part better. Tell the people you trust the truth, give them real choices, and never ever spend their lives as cheaply as your own. There's a thing hidden in the school, he said. Third-floor corridor, the one Dumbledore told the whole school to avoid on the first night, which, by the way, is the single most suspicious sentence a headmaster has ever said. You don't warn a castle full of curious children away from a place unless you want a particular curious child to wonder about it. He buttered toast. It came out of a high-security vault at Gringotts the same day I did. It's small. Important enough that the most powerful wizard alive is using it as bait, and the darkest wizard alive is trying to steal it. And I'm fairly sure the Dark One's already inside the castle wearing a teacher like a coat. Hermione had gone pale. Ron had stopped chewing. To their enormous credit, neither of them ran. You're sure? Hermione said. Not are you sure? She'd known Harry 4 months, and are you sure was a question for people who hadn't watched him drop a troll with a leather strap. Who's the teacher? Quirrell, the stutter's a costume, so's most of the fear. Harry tapped his scar. This thing goes cold every time I'm near him, like a draft from a room with no sun in it. That's not a metaphor I enjoy. There's something on the back of his head, and it wants the thing in the corridor, and it wants my attention, and it's about to get a lot of both. Then we tell Dumbledore, Hermione said immediately. Or McGonagall, or already had the chat with Dumbledore. Last night by a creepy mirror, long story. Harry's grin flickered, went briefly real. Here's the thing about telling the grown-ups, Hermione, the grown-ups set this up. The bait, the breadcrumbs, the cloak that showed up on the one night I'd be alone in a castle full of secrets. This whole corridor is a stage, and they built it, and they're hoping I'll walk onto it and play the part they wrote. Dumbledore wants me to be the brave boy who saves the day. Voldemort wants me to be the unkillable prize he finally gets his hands on. They both think they're directing this. And what do you want? Ron asked quietly, and it was the smartest question anyone had asked all morning, and Harry loved him for it. I want to walk onto their stage, Harry said, and do a completely different play. I want to take the trap they built for the Chosen One and spring it on purpose with the wrong guy inside me, the version of me that thinks dying is a Tuesday, and break it so thoroughly that neither of them ever trusts a plan again. He set down the toast. But I'm not taking you two down a trapdoor after a Dark Lord, that's not happening. You're too important and I like you too much and I've buried teammates before and I'm full up. So here's your actual job, and it matters more than the dramatic part. You two are my anchor. You stay up here in the light where it's safe. You keep the file. If I go down and something goes wrong, really wrong, the wrong I can come back from, but slowly, you're the ones who know where I went and why, and you're the ones who make sure the story that gets told afterward is true, not the noble, useful lie the old men will want to spin. He looked between them. Can you do that? Can you be the part of this that stays alive and remembers? Hermione's eyes were bright. That's not a smaller job. You're making it sound smaller. It's not. No, Harry agreed softly. It's the biggest one. Somebody has to be the person who lived to tell it right. In my experience, that's the hardest thing in any war. Hermione, given a mystery and an enemy and permission to use the library without limit, became something close to a force of nature herself. She spent 3 days in the stacks and emerged with a thin sheaf of notes and the particular gleam of a person who has out-researched a problem into submission. Nicholas Flamel, she announced, dropping into the good chair, is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. It produces the elixir of life and turns metal to gold. It's 600 years old, and Dumbledore worked with him. That's what's under the trapdoor. That's the small thing in the big vault. It's not just treasure, Harry, it's immortality in a rock. Of course it is. Harry sat back, and the whole board clicked another degree into focus. A guy who wants to never die, a stone that makes you never die. He doesn't want the stone to be rich, he wants it to be eternal, and he wants a body to be eternal in. And he stopped, and the white voice finished the thought in the cold, flat way it finished the bad ones, and he's been told by now about a body that's already eternal. Okay. That reframes things. He's not just after the stone, he's comparison shopping. The stone's plan B, plan A is wearing my face. Ron looked up from the chessboard, pale. That's so much worse. It's so much better, Harry corrected, grinning because the red voice had already pointed out the joke buried in it. A guy who wants me dead, I just outlast. A guy who wants my body, who's decided I'm the prize. He's not going to risk damaging the merchandise. Every plan he makes from here has to keep me intact. That's a constraint. That's a leash I get to hold. You can do incredible things to a man who needs you in one piece. He pulled the parchment toward him and started sketching, block, capitals, arrows, the cheerful geometry of a plan. Hermione, you're terrifying. Never stop. Ron, the chessboard down there, if it's the kind of trap I think it is, it'll want a player. What does a chess set built to fight do if nobody plays the game the way it expects? Ron frowned, the strategist in him waking. It stalls. A chess set only knows chess. If you don't make legal moves, it doesn't know what you're doing. It'd just wait, confused. That's my boy. Harry pointed the quill at him. That's the whole strategy for everything down there. Every trap in that corridor is a rule, and every rule assumes you'll play by it, and the second you stop playing by it, the trap doesn't know what to do. The dog wants you to fight it, so you play it music. The fire wants you to fear it. The chess wants you to play. The mirror wants you to want. He capped the quill. And the Dark Lord at the bottom wants me to be the scared chosen one walking bravely to his doom. So I'm going to be a guy who finds the whole thing funny, and it's going to break him the way it breaks all of them, because nobody, not one person in this entire society, has ever built a contingency for being laughed at. They talked late into the night, the three of them and a hovering, fascinated Neville, mapping it out, not the dramatic part, the part Harry would carry alone, but the shape of it, the why of it, the version that would survive. And somewhere in the talking, the thing Harry had been building all autumn finished assembling itself. Not a weapon, not a plan, but a team, a redhead who could read a board, a genius who could read a book, a gentle boy learning he could be brave, the best small army a man had ever marched into a war with. He looked around the firelit corner at the three faces he decided weeks ago were his, and felt the dangerous coal in his chest, the loving things when you can't die thing, and let himself feel it for exactly one breath, because that was the deal. Then he rolled up the parchment, committed the plan to the one place no one could search, his own crowded, deathless, 2 lifetimes deep skull, and grinned because the reconnaissance came next, and reconnaissance was his favorite part. They scouted the corridor that afternoon, the three of them under the cloak, which was a tight fit and involved a great deal of whispered argument about whose elbow was whose. The door at the end was locked, a simple charm, which Hermione opened with a flick and a smug little alohomora, and which Harry could equally have opened with the lockpick in his sock, a fact he mentioned to her great offense. Behind the door was a dog. It was a dog the way the Hogwarts Express was a train, that is, technically, and at a scale that reorganized your understanding of the category. It had 3 heads, each the size of a wheelbarrow, and 6 eyes that snapped open, and a smell that arrived a full second before the growling, and it stood on a trapdoor set into the floor, which told Harry everything he needed to know about where the corridor led and why. Ron made a sound like a deflating bagpipe. Hermione's hand found Harry's sleeve. Harry looked up at 12 feet of furious tripartite guard dog, and felt the old, familiar, deeply unhealthy joy of a problem he could see all the way through. Okay, 3 things, he murmured, easing them all back toward the door. 1, that's standing on a trapdoor, so the stone, let's call it the stone, vaults and dragons and dark lords, it's a stone is down there under the dog. 2. A three-headed dog is a Greek thing that Cerberus guards the underworld, and the one universal fact about Cerberus in every story is that he goes to sleep if you play him music. Somebody got this dog from somebody, and that somebody told them the music thing because you don't keep a Cerberus without learning the off switch. He eased the door shut on the snarling. And 3, Hermione breathed. 3, said Harry, holding up the wooden flute Hagrid had given him for Christmas, which he had, with the instincts of a man who never went anywhere without checking the exits, brought along. I think I just figured out who Dumbledore borrowed the dog from. Big guy, beard, soft heart, loose lips, gives meaningful Christmas presents. He turned the flute over, and the grin spread slow and wicked and delighted across his face. Hagrid gave me the key to the lock without either of us knowing it. Which means the old man's careful breadcrumb by breadcrumb plan has a hole in it the size of a half-giant's enthusiasm. God, I love this castle. That night Harry lay awake in the dormitory, the flute on the pillow beside him, the cloak folded under his bed, the plan complete in his head and committed to no parchment that anyone could find. Below him, somewhere in the dark stone, a dark lord schemed and an old man worried, and a stone sat under a sleeping wind musical dog, and all of it, every careful thread of it, had been spun by clever, powerful, frightened men who believed the story was theirs to tell. Harry Potter closed his eyes and smiled. He was going to walk into the most elaborate trap two geniuses had ever built for him, and he was going to have the time of his life. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The world can't handle him. By spring, the staff room at Hogwarts had developed a new and unofficial agenda item which appeared on no parchment and was discussed in no minutes, and which could be summarized as, what in the name of Merlin's increasingly frayed nerves do we do about the Potter boy? It was not that he broke rules. Children broke rules, that was practically the job. It was that he broke them correctly, that he had read every regulation in the school charter, identified which ones existed for safety and which existed only because they had always existed, obeyed the first category with cheerful precision, and dismantled the second category in front of witnesses while explaining exactly why he was doing it. He had, for instance, stopped attending history of magic, on the grounds which he submitted in writing, to Professor Binns, who was a ghost and had not noticed a student in 40 years, that a class taught by a dead man reading the same lecture he'd been reading since before the war was not education but haunting, and that Harry would be spending the period in the library learning history from books that had been updated since the invention of the printing press. He sent Binns a polite note to this effect every single morning. He got a perfect score on every history exam. No one could work out how to punish a boy for skipping a class to study the subject of the class more effectively, and McGonagall had been heard to say with her face in her hands that this was somehow worse than truancy. He had reorganized the house points system, or at least exposed it. Caught losing points for cheek by an irritable professor, Harry had produced a small ledger, an actual ledger, kept in his own block capitals, in which he had recorded every point awarded and deducted in Gryffindor for the entire year, cross-referenced against the stated rules, and demonstrated, politely and devastatingly, that points were awarded almost entirely on the basis of which students' teachers personally liked. That the system was not a meritocracy but a popularity contest with bookkeeping, and that he, Harry, had decided to stop caring about it entirely and would appreciate it if his house's standing were no longer used as a lever to make 11-year-olds anxious. Gryffindor, freed from anxiety about points, promptly relaxed and started winning more of them, which Harry found delicious. "He's not malicious," McGonagall told Dumbledore in the headmaster's office on a gray February afternoon, with the particular exhaustion of a woman who had taught for decades and met her match in a first year. "That's the maddening part, Albus. If he were cruel, I'd know what to do, but he's kind. He's the kindest boy in the school. He sat with the Creevy boy for an hour when the child was homesick. He's quietly made it impossible for the Slytherins to bully anyone smaller than them just by noticing. He carried Neville Longbottom's entire confidence onto his own back in the boy's flourishing. The students would walk into the lake for him." She pressed her lips together. "And he respects nothing, not the rules, not the traditions, not, forgive me, not you. He looks at the whole structure of this school, this society, and he sees a list of suggestions. And he keeps everyone that makes sense and burns everyone that doesn't, and the horror of it, Albus, the absolute horror, is that he is usually right." Albus Dumbledore sat behind his desk with his fingertips together and a plate of untouched lemon sherbets at his elbow and listened and did not interrupt, because he had spent 2 months arriving at the same conclusion by a longer road. He had tried in his careful way to manage the boy. He had invited Harry to his office for those gentle, twinkling conversations in which Dumbledore had, across a long life, steered a great many young people toward the choices the greater good required, conversations built on warmth, on shared confidence, on the flattering sense of being taken into the great man's trust. They had worked on everyone. They had worked on Tom Riddle once for a while until they hadn't. They did not work on Harry, because Harry arrived at each one having already mapped the conversation's intended destination, and spent the whole time cheerfully naming the techniques as Dumbledore deployed them. "Oh, that's nice. You open with a personal confidence to build rapport. That's good. That's textbook. I do that. Okay, now you're going to pivot to my parents to access the grief, and then you'll connect the grief to a sense of duty. Watch, here it comes." Until Dumbledore, the greatest legilimens and manipulator of his age, had found himself, for the first time in a century, simply talking to someone, defenses useless. Because the boy disarmed manipulation not by resisting it but by narrating it, turning every move into a magic trick performed with the cards face up. I have in my time, Dumbledore said at last slowly to McGonagall and to the grey window and to the phoenix dozing on its perch, managed kings and dark lords and the entire Wisengamot. I once talked Gellert Grindelwald himself into a corner he never escaped. And I find I cannot manage an 11-year-old because he refuses to want anything I can offer or fear anything I can threaten. He picked up a lemon sherbet, turned it over, and for the first time Minerva had ever witnessed, put it down again uneat. He has read me, Minerva, as thoroughly as I have ever read another living soul, and what unsettles me most is not that he has won our small contests. It is that he keeps, at the end of each one, telling me he forgives me. As though he is the one being patient with me. What do we do, Albus? The headmaster was quiet for a long moment. Outside, snow fell on the grounds, on the lake, on the forbidden corridor where a three-headed dog slept above a trapdoor and a stone waited like a baited hook. I am beginning to suspect, Dumbledore said, that there is nothing to be done in the sense you mean. One does not manage a force of nature, one does not handle the weather. He looked up and his blue eyes had a strange light in them, something between dread and a wholly unfamiliar species of hope. One can only decide whether to stand in its path or step aside, and I have spent so very long, Minerva, standing in everyone's path, arranging, steering, carrying the whole board in my head because I believed no one else could be trusted with it. He almost smiled. Perhaps it is time I learned what happens when I let a piece move itself. That piece, McGonagall said grimly, is going to go down that trapdoor, you know he is. He's already found the dog. Hagrid let it slip, the great fool that a nice boy asked all about Fluffy and music. Quirrell is circling the stone like a vulture, and you know what rides behind that man's turban you've known for weeks, and you're letting it play out because you wanted to test the boy against it. And now the boy's going to walk into the middle of it on purpose, and we will not be able to stop him because we have never once been able to stop him. No, Dumbledore agreed quietly, we will not. He rose and went to the window and watched the snow. But Minerva, and this is the thought that has kept me awake, I am no longer certain we need to. I built the trap on the corridor to draw out the thing wearing queerness, yes. I assumed the boy would be the bait, and that I would have to be there at the last moment to save him from a war he was too young to fight. The snow fell. I am beginning to think I had it precisely backward. I am beginning to think that the most dangerous thing in this castle is not the creature beneath the turban, nor the stone, nor even myself. I am beginning to think it is a cheerful, kind, unkillable child who has decided that the entire war is beneath his dignity to take seriously, and that when he finally goes down those stairs, it will not be Harry Potter who needs saving. He turned from the window. For the first time in the long and careful and lonely campaign of his life, Albus Dumbledore looked to Minerva McGonagall, genuinely uncertain which side of the board he was on. It will be everyone else, he said. Students, meanwhile, had reached a conclusion the staff hadn't dared to, that Harry Potter was the best thing to happen to Hogwarts in a century and that the rules he broke had it coming. It started small and spread like weather. Fred and George Weasley, Ron's twin elder brothers, professional chaos and Harry's natural kin, adopted him within a week as a kind of spiritual heir, and the partnership that resulted aged several teachers visibly. The twins supplied the mischief, Harry supplied the theory. Where they had spent years pulling pranks by trial and error, Harry treated the castle's defenses as a system to be reverse-engineered, and under his guidance the twins' operations acquired a terrifying new precision. They learned which corridors the caretaker patrolled and when which portraits gossiped and which kept secrets, which suits of armor could be bribed with flattery more than you'd think. The great hall ceiling rained harmless soap bubbles during a particularly pompous assembly. A statue of a famously dour former headmaster spent a week loudly complimenting everyone who passed. Filch's confiscation cabinet developed the habit of returning items to their owners with an apologetic note. None of it was cruel. That was the thing the older students noticed and loved him for. Harry's chaos had a direction, it punctured the pompous, defended the small, and embarrassed exactly the people who'd built their comfort on everyone else's fear. He turned the whole grim hierarchy of the school into a joke, and a joke, it turned out, was the one thing that hierarchy had no defense against, because you cannot intimidate people who are laughing at you. You realize, said Fred, or possibly George, sprawled in the Gryffindor common room one evening with the reverence of a disciple, that you're going to be a legend, like an actual one. Decades from now there will be first years telling each other about the Potter who picked locks and laughed at the killing curse and made Snape teach him on purpose. Legends are a trap, gentlemen, Harry said, not looking up from the elaborate diagram he was drawing of the castle's secret passages. The second you become a legend, people stop seeing the actual you and start worshipping the merchandise. That's how they did it to me as a baby, built a whole boy who lived out of a thing I don't even remember. He tapped the diagram. So here's the move, and you two are the only ones I'll teach it to because you've got the gift. You don't fight the legend and you don't believe it. You use it. Let them tell the stories. Let the name get big and shiny and scary. And then you live your actual life behind it, doing the real work while everybody's busy staring at the statue. He grinned. The legend's a mask. The trick is never forgetting there's a person inside it, having the time of his life, watering down everyone's fear one joke at a time. The twins looked at each other with the expression of men who have just received scripture. It was not all soap bubbles. There was a sharper edge underneath, and the older, cleverer students felt it. They'd seen the boy go cold, seen it the day a seventh year shoved a small Hufflepuff down a flight of stairs and found Harry suddenly, silently there, not raising a wand, not raising his voice, just looking at the seventh year with eyes that had gone flat and ancient and entirely without fear, saying something too quiet to hear, after which the seventh year had gone white and helped the Hufflepuff up and never bullied anyone again. They didn't know what Harry had said. They knew they never wanted to be on the receiving end of it, and so the school sorted itself gently around the gravity of him, a place where the kind were safe and the cruel were nervous, and the central unspoken law was that the cheerful boy in the good chair would notice, and that being noticed by Harry Potter when you'd done something small and mean was a quietly unsurvivable experience. The staff called it a discipline problem. The students called it the best year of their lives. Both were correct, and neither could do a single thing to stop it. And the wizarding world ground slowly toward the spring with the dawning, collective, deeply uneasy sense that its sleeping savior had woken up and turned out to be something nobody had a category for, and that the things he could not be made to take seriously included, increasingly, the entire architecture of how things had always been done. The Quidditch match against Slytherin was where Quirrell made his move on Harry directly, and where Harry made his on Quirrell, and where the comedy stopped for exactly 90 seconds and reminded everyone watching what the laughter had been sitting on top of. Harry had by this point learned the rules of Quidditch, found them delightful and slightly insane, and discovered that being a seeker, the player who chased a tiny winged ball and ended the game by catching it, was a role that rewarded exactly his particular combination of fearlessness and pattern recognition. He was predictably very good. He was good in a way that the crowd had begun to find unnerving, because a seeker who knows in his bones that he cannot fall flies the way no sane person ever has. Midway through the match, his broom tried to kill him. It bucked, it rolled. It tried to climb and dive at once, and then it tried with great determination to shake him off into a 50-foot drop, and in the stands Hermione had her opera glasses fixed on the staff box where Quirrell Quirrell sat muttering, eyes fixed and unblinking on Harry, lips moving in the steady rhythm of a sustained jinx. Anyone else would have been thrown. A normal seeker would have fallen, and the fall might have killed him, and that Harry understood instantly, even as he clung sideways to a broom doing its level best to murder him, was the entire point. Quirrell wasn't trying to win a game. He was running another test. Will the fall finally do it? Is there a height, a speed, and impact that stops him? So Harry gave him an answer. He stopped fighting the broom. He let go with his hands, hooked one ankle over the shaft, and rode the bucking, homicidal broomstick upside down, arms folded 300 feet over a screaming stadium, grinning directly up at the staff box where a man in a turban was trying to kill him. He looked, the entire stadium would later agree, like a boy enjoying a fairground ride. He looked like he was daring it. And then, while Quirrell's concentration faltered in pure disbelief, Harry spotted the snitch, a gold glint near the Slytherin goalposts, kicked off the dying broom entirely and fell. The crowd screamed. Harry fell 40 feet in a controlled dive he could only execute because he did not on any level fear the ground, caught the snitch in his outstretched hand, twisted in the air, and hit the pitch in a roll that snapped his collarbone with a crack the front rows heard. He came up on one knee holding the struggling gold ball over his head, collarbone already grinding itself back into place, and the stadium lost its collective mind. Gryffindor had won. The boy who lived had ended a match by jumping off his own broom. And up in the staff box, Quirrell had gone the color of spoiled milk because his test had returned its result, and the result was no. There is no height, there is no impact, it does not stop him. That night Harry went to find Quirrell, and the comedy came off like a coat dropped at the door. He didn't bring his wand, that was deliberate. He found the man alone in the dark defense classroom, garlic-strung and trembling, and Harry walked in without knocking, and he didn't make a single joke, and the absence of the joke was the most frightening thing that had happened to Quirrell in a year of being haunted by a dark lord. "Sit down," Harry said quietly. Quirrell sat down. He hadn't decided to. His knees simply folded, the way a body's will sometimes does in the presence of something that has stopped performing for it. "I know what's on the back of your head," Harry said. He stood very still, hands at his sides, and his voice had none of the music in it now, none of the bright running patter. It was low and level and old, the voice of a man who had been the scariest thing in a great many rooms and had simply, for 4 months, chosen not to be. "I know you jinxed my broom today to see if a fall would kill me. I know you've been running tests since October, the curse in the corridor, that was you or him through you, and I want to be really clear about something, Quirrell, while it's still just you and me, before this gets loud and stupid in public the way it's going to." He took one step closer, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop with him. "Every test you run on me I pass. There's no height, there's no curse. There's no poison, no fall, no blade, no fire. I have died and it didn't take, and it's never going to take, and the thing on your head is going to spend the rest of its miserable smoke and spite existence learning that the hard way." Another step. "But here's the part I came to say, the part that isn't about me." He stopped, close enough now that Quirrell could feel the cold coming off the boy's scar like the draft came off the thing beneath the turban, two cold things meeting. "You hurt one of my friends, Ron, Hermione, Hagrid, Neville, any of the kids in this castle who can actually be hurt, and I will stop finding this funny. And you do not want to meet the version of me that isn't finding this funny. Nobody's ever survived meeting him. I barely did." He held the man's eyes. "Pass that up the chain, to the thing on your head, word for word." For a long moment, Quirinius Quirrell stared into the green eyes of an 11-year-old child and felt, in the deepest animal part of himself, the thing that prey feels in the half-second before it understands the shape moving in the grass. And then from the back of his skull a cold whisper answered, not through Quirrell's stammering mouth but directly, the turban seeming to lean, the voice sliding out into the dark room like oil onto water. "How wonderful you are," breathed Lord Voldemort, and there was no fear in it at all, only a vast and patient appetite. "How utterly, perfectly wonderful. Do you hear yourself, boy? No height, no curse, no blade. You stand there and you threaten me with the darkness inside you, and you do not understand, you genuinely do not understand, that you have just described in loving detail the most beautiful thing I have ever heard of." Harry went still. This was new. This was the first time the thing had spoken to him directly, and the white voice came online fast and cold. "It isn't afraid. Recalibrate. It heard the threat and it isn't afraid. It's hungry. Why is it? You think I want you dead," the whisper crooned. "I did once. I tried once. It was, I will admit, embarrassing. But I have had 10 years as less than a ghost, boy. 10 years of smoke, of borrowed bodies, of leeching life from snakes and squirrels and weak-willed men, all because the only thing in this world I have ever truly feared is the one thing you have made into a joke. Death," the cold sharpened to a point of terrible focus. "And here you stand, a body that death cannot touch. A vessel that the killing curse rolls off of like rain. Do you understand now? I do not want to destroy you, Harry Potter. I want to understand you. I want what you have. In one way or another, before this is over, I am going to take it." The dark room was silent. Quirrell trembled. And Harry Potter, who had walked in to deliver a threat, stood in the cold and recalculated the entire board in the space of 3 breaths. Because he had just learned the thing that changed everything, that his enemy didn't fear him, that his enemy coveted him, that the unkillable body which made him untouchable also made him the single most valuable object in the world to a creature that had spent a decade as smoke, and would do anything, anything at all, to never be smoke again. "Huh," Harry said softly, and the comedy didn't come back, not yet, but something else did, something worse for Voldemort than fear. Interest, the bright, terrible, problem-solving interest of a man who had just been handed a far better fight than he'd expected. Okay, you don't want to kill me, you want to be me, you want the warranty." He nodded slowly in the dark, and a slow grin began at last to pull at the corner of his mouth, the grin of a man who has found the funny again in the worst possible place. "Oh, that's so much better, that's so much more fun. See, a guy who wants me dead I just have to outlast, but a guy who wants what I've got, a guy who wants to climb inside the warranty." He turned for the door, and over his shoulder, the grin now fully back, full and wicked and delighted. "That's a guy I can embarrass. Bring your stone, Tom, bring your whole plan. I'll meet you at the bottom of the trapdoor. Or something you don't mind getting weird." He walked out whistling, and behind him a dark lord and his trembling servant sat in the cold, dark classroom, and for the first time in 10 years, the thing that had been Lord Voldemort felt the faint, unfamiliar, deeply unwelcome sensation of having somehow said too much. Severus Snape cornered him 3 days before the end of term in the dungeon corridor after the last detention of the year, and the cornering had the quality of a man who had rehearsed it and hated that he had to. "Potter." The voice came out of a shadow that turned out to be Snape, leaning against the cold stone with his arms folded and his black eyes glittering. "You will tell me what you know, and you will tell me now because I have neither the patience nor the time for your performance, Professor." Harry stopped, genuinely pleased, because the prickly apprenticeship in the dungeons had become, over the year, one of the realer things in his life. Snape teaching him the dark theory the curriculum was too frightened to touch, Harry asking the questions no one else dared, both of them pretending the whole time that they couldn't stand each other. "You've been limping, right leg, since Halloween, on and off, worse this week. You got bitten by something with 3 heads, didn't you? You've been trying to get past Fluffy." The black eyes flickered. "Explain that statement." "You think Quirrell's after the stone, you're right, and you've been guarding it, trying to stay between him and the trapdoor, and the dog got you doing it. The whole school thinks you're the villain. By the way, half of Gryffindor's convinced you jinxed my broom at the match. They've got it exactly backward. You're the one standing in the doorway." Harry tilted his head. "Which is a thankless, miserable, invisible job, and you've been doing it all year while everyone hated you for a face you can't help having, and nobody said thank you, so thank you, for what it's worth, from the kid you can't stand." For a moment Snape simply stared at him, and something complicated and old moved behind the sourness. A man braced for cheek who'd been handed, instead, the truth, which was the one weapon he had no defense against. "You insufferable child," he said, but the venom had gone out of it. "You knew, all year you knew it was Quirrell, you knew I was guarding the thing, and you said nothing." "I said plenty, just not to people who'd waste it." Harry leaned against the opposite wall, mirroring him, 2 professionals in a cold corridor. "Here's where we are, Professor, and I'm going to be straight with you because you've earned it. Quirrell's going for the stone the second Dumbledore leaves the castle, which is going to be soon, because the dark thing on the back of his head is going to forge a reason. When that happens, you're going to try to stop him, and you're good, you're maybe the best dueler in this castle, but you can't win that fight, not because you're not skilled, because the thing wearing Quirrell isn't playing the fight you think you're in. It doesn't care if you hurt the body. It'll burn Quirrell down to the wick and slither out the back of his skull, and you'll have won a duel against a corpse while the real enemy gets away clean." "And you propose," Snape said icily, "that I do nothing, that I leave the school's defense to first year. I propose you let me handle the part that needs handling, and you handle the part that actually matters, which nobody else can do." Harry's voice dropped the patter, went level and serious, the cold version Quirrell had met 3 nights before. When this goes down, there's going to be a coral-shaped body left over, and there's going to be a question of what really happened, and there's going to be a castle full of frightened students and a ministry full of frightened officials all desperate for a clean story. You're the one who's going to be standing closest to it. So here's my ask, the only one I've got. When it's over, when I've done whatever weird, undignified thing I'm about to do to the most feared wizard of the age, you make sure the grown-ups don't bury the truth under a nice, useful lie. You're the most honest man in this castle, Professor. You're so honest it's made your whole life miserable. I need that honesty pointed at the record when this is done. He paused. Dumbledore tells noble stories. You tell true ones. The world's going to need the true one. Snape was silent for a long moment in the cold dungeon dark. You speak, he said at last slowly, as though you have already lived through wars. Couple of them, Harry pushed off the wall. Lost people, made the mistake of fighting clean, fighting fair, fighting the way the script wanted, got good people killed doing it more than once. I'm not making that mistake again. This time I fight weird and I keep the people I love 100 miles from the trapdoor, and I make sure somebody who tells the truth is left standing to tell it. He smiled, and for once there was no mockery in it at all, only the strange, exhausted warmth of one veteran recognizing another. You and my friends, that's my whole army, Professor. The ones who stay alive and remember, it's a better army than Dumbledore's ever had. He started down the corridor. Behind him, Snape's voice, very quiet, almost against its own will. Potter, the thing you intend to do tonight to the Dark Lord. A pause. Will it be enough? Harry stopped. He didn't turn around. No, he said honestly, not tonight. Tonight I just embarrass him and send him back to being smoke. He's got anchors, things tying him to the world. I've read enough to know a man doesn't survive a killing curse rebounding off a baby unless he's done something monstrous to his own soul to keep it stapled here, and I'm betting he did it more than once because he's exactly the kind of overachiever who'd make backups. Now he glanced back, and his eyes were bright and cold and certain in the torchlight. So tonight isn't the end, tonight's the trailer, but it's going to be a hell of a trailer. And it's going to teach him the one lesson he's spent his whole life refusing to learn. He grinned. That the scariest thing in the world isn't a man who wants to kill you, it's a man who thinks you're funny. And he was gone into the dark, leaving Severus Snape standing alone in the dungeon, nursing a leg bitten by a three-headed dog, guarding a stone against a war that a cheerful, unkillable child had just calmly informed him was only beginning, and discovering to his own profound irritation that for the first time in many bitter years he believed someone was going to win it. Word of the boy had spread beyond the castle by then, in the way such things do. The Daily Prophet had run a small confused item about unusual conduct by the boy who lived. A junior ministry official dispatched to assess whether the Potter child constituted a regulatory concern had spent an afternoon with Harry, emerged ashen, and filed a report consisting largely of the phrase, recommend no action. Recommend, in fact, that we never speak of him again. The wizarding world, which had spent 10 years telling itself a comfortable story about its sleeping savior, was beginning dimly to sense that the savior had woken up wrong, woken up funny, and did not know yet whether to be relieved or afraid. It would learn, they all would. The whole world was about to learn the same lesson on the same night at the bottom of the same trapdoor. The world could not handle Harry Potter. It was about to get a great deal of practice trying. The trap sprang itself in the second week of June, on the kind of warm, bright evening that makes a castle feel safe right up until it isn't. An urgent owl arrived from the Ministry of Magic summoning Albus Dumbledore to London on business that could not wait, and Dumbledore, reading it, knew it for what it was, the way he knew most things, which is to say completely and slightly too late. It was a lure. Voldemort wanted him out of the castle for the run at the stone. The forgery was good. It was not good enough to fool the greatest wizard of the age, but that Dumbledore understood with a cold clarity was not the point. The point was that he now had to choose, stay and let the creature beneath the turban abort and slither away to try again another year. In some place Dumbledore could not watch or leave openly, and let the trap close tonight here on ground he had prepared, with the obstacles he had laid down the trapdoor specifically to slow an intruder and test a boy. He had built the whole corridor for exactly this night. Every protection, Fluffy, the devil's snare, the flying keys, the chessboard, the potions riddle, was a gauntlet designed to be passable by a clever and determined child and lethal to almost anyone else, a filter, a test, the kindest, cruelest exam ever set. He had meant to be near at the end of it. He had meant to arrive at the climactic moment the way he always arrived, to save the boy and seal the win and tell afterward the clean and noble and useful story. Dumbledore stood in his office with the forged summons in his hand and made, for the first time in his long life, a genuinely new decision. I will go to London, he told Fawkes the Phoenix, who watched him with ancient gold eyes. I will leave the castle, I will let it happen tonight on this ground. He set the parchment down. But I will not race back at the last moment to save him, I have decided. I am going to step out of the path, old friend, and I am going to find out what he does when no one arrives to rescue him and no one arrives to instruct him, and the whole stage is finally entirely his. A strange light came into the blue eyes. Because I have spent 100 years certain that without me to hold it, the board falls into chaos. And there is a boy in this castle who looks at chaos the way I once looked at order, as a thing he can use. I find I very much want to see it. God help me, Minerva would say I have lost my mind. Perhaps I have. Perhaps losing it is the most honest thing I have done in 50 years. He left for London at sunset openly by the front gates so that the watching dark would see him go. Harry knew within the hour, he always knew. Hermione brought him the news, breathless, Dumbledore gone, summoned to London, the castle suddenly missing its keystone, and the three of them sat in a quiet corner of the common room, and Harry felt the whole board click into its final shape. Tonight, he said, he's going for the stone tonight. Dumbledore got lured out, which means Voldemort thinks the coast is clear, which means Quirrell goes down the trapdoor the second it's dark. He was already standing, already pulling the cloak from his bag, already checking the flute was in his pocket and the lockpick was in his sock, and the small, ordinary lethal hardware was where he'd put it, because a man prepared for magic and unprepared for everything else was a man who died on schedule. And here's the beautiful part, here's the part I've been waiting for since Christmas. He grinned. Dumbledore left. He didn't double the guard, he didn't seal the corridor, he didn't pull Quirrell aside and end it, he left. You know what that means? That he's abandoned us, Hermione said, white-faced. That he's stepping aside, Harry said softly, and there was something almost like wonder in it, one professional recognizing another making a move he'd never expected. The old man finally figured out he can't direct this, so he's clearing the stage, he's letting me have it. Whether he means it as a test or a surrender or just an old man too tired to hold the board one more night, he's giving me the whole thing clean, no interference. He pulled the cloak over one shoulder. He's going to find out what I do when nobody comes to save me, so am I. Honestly, it's going to be great. Harry, Ron grabbed his arm. He'd gone pale, but he wasn't letting go, and Harry loved him for it all over again. There's a dog. In Devil's Snare, Hermione looked it up, and a dark wizard at the bottom who wants mate. You can't die fine, but they can do worse than kill you. They can. They can hurt me, yeah, Harry's voice gentled. He put his hand over Ron's. Pain's real. The healing doesn't take the pain. It never has. That's the cruel joke at the middle of the whole thing. So yeah, tonight's going to hurt. Probably a lot. He smiled, and it was the realest thing in the room. But here's what I've got that he doesn't. The power of the prophecy, said the Dark Lord, knows not. And it isn't love, Hermione. Sorry, I know that's the answer in the script. It's that I've already lived through the worst thing. Twice. I've been the man who lost everyone, and I've been the kid who had no one, and I came out the other side of both of them still able to make a joke. So there is nothing at the bottom of that trapdoor that can take anything from me that I haven't already lost and survived. He squeezed Ron's hand and let go. That's the power, not that I can't die, that I'm not afraid to live through anything. You can't threaten a man who's already read the last page, and laughed. He pulled the cloak fully over himself, and his two best friends watched him vanish from the world between one breath and the next, the way he always did, and his voice came out of the empty air, warm and certain and bright. Keep the file, he told them. Whatever the old men say happened down there tomorrow, you two make sure the true version's the one that survives. That's your job, it's the biggest one. A pause, and then mischievous, fading toward the portrait hole. And if I'm not back by breakfast, don't come after me. Eat my bacon, I'd want you to have the bacon. And then he was gone, a door swinging shut on nothing, leaving Ron and Hermione alone in the firelight with the largest and most frightening job of their young lives, to stay alive and to remember and to wait. Harry Potter walked through the dark castle invisible, the flute in his hand, the grin on his unseen face, toward a forbidden corridor and a sleeping three-headed dog and a trapdoor and the most elaborate trap two of the cleverest men alive had ever built for a chosen one. He had never in either of his lives been so completely, ridiculously happy. Okay, he murmured to himself, to the whispers, to the audience he'd been certain was watching since the very first paper cut in a cupboard a lifetime ago. Showtime, and he reached the door and lifted the flute to his lips and began very softly to play. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, Chaos Unleashed. The flute did its work. 3 enormous heads drooped, one after another, 6 eyes sliding shut, and 12 feet of guard dog folded down onto the stone with a sigh like a collapsing tent. Harry kept playing as he edged across the floor, freed the heavy iron ring of the trapdoor with one hand, and looked down into a darkness that smelled of damp earth and old magic. Okay, he murmured around the flute. Trapdoor, classic, 9 out of 10 dark wizard interior design. Loses a point because somebody clearly went down here ahead of me. See how the dog was already drowsy when I got here. Quirrell beat me to the start. He pocketed the flute and the nearest head twitched, and Harry decided that gravity was, as ever, the most reliable tool in his kit and jumped. He fell into the dark and landed on something soft, which his entire body's experience told him was the most dangerous thing softness could possibly be. The plant moved the instant he touched it. Tendrils, thick and green and damp, whipped up around his ankles, his wrists, his throat, tightening with the patient enthusiasm of a thing that had all night and a great appetite. Devil's Snare, the white voice supplied instantly from somewhere in the green encroaching dark, Hermione's chapter on it. It strangles, it crushes, it tightens the more you struggle, and it recoils from fire and light. Yeah, I read the same book. Harry didn't struggle. That was the trick most people died missing. The plant fed on panic the way the Dark Lord upstairs fed on fear, and Harry had run clean out of both a long time ago. He went still, let the tendrils wrap him, let one coil around his throat and squeeze until the lights began to swim, and then with his free hand calmly drew his wand and said, Lumos Solemn, and a small fierce sun bloomed in his fist. The Devil's Snare recoiled with a sound like 100 disappointed snakes, dropping him through its loosening grip to the stone floor below. He landed, rolled, came up grinning, the little sun still burning in his hand. See, this is what I love about this place, he said conversationally, to the empty passage, to the whispers, to the audience. Dumbledore built a whole escape room. He could have put a steel door and a password down here. He could have stuck the stone in a hole in the ground and forgotten about it. Instead, he built a series of cute little puzzles, each one passable by a clever, determined child and lethal to a dumb one because the old man can't help himself. He's not guarding the stone, he's grading whoever comes after it. This whole corridor is a final exam with a body count. He dusted himself off and started down the passage where a flicker of light and a rushing, clattering sound waited ahead. Joke's on him. I always wanted to take a test I could cheat at. The next chamber was full of birds. That was the first impression, a high stone room brilliantly lit, the air above him thick with hundreds of tiny things wheeling and glinting and swooping. It took Harry a second to resolve them, not birds, keys, hundreds of small winged keys flickering on jeweled dragonfly wings, and across the chamber a heavy wooden door locked, and against the wall a clutch of old broomsticks for the chasing of them. He wants me to fly, Harry said aloud, delighted. He wants me to get on a broom, chase down the one right key out of 1,000, catch it midair like a tiny snitch because he knows I'm a seeker. He built this for me, the sentimental old monster. This is a love letter shaped like a death trap. He looked at the brooms. He looked at the swirling cloud of keys. And then he looked at the heavy wooden door and the way the white voice was already looking at it, which was the way a locksmith looks at a lock. He walked past the brooms entirely. He crossed to the door, knelt, pulled the slim lockpick from his sock, ordinary muggle steel, bought in a junk shop in another lifetime, the single least magical object in the entire enchanted castle, and went to work on a lock that 1,000 years of wizards had assumed could only be opened by its key, because it had never once occurred to any of them that a lock was just a machine, and a machine could be persuaded by anything patient enough to learn its shape. The lock clicked open in 90 seconds. Above him, the cloud of winged keys wheeled on, guarding a door that no longer needed opening, and Harry rose, pushed it wide, and bowed to the swarm. No notes, he told them. Beautiful work. Genuinely, tell Dumbledore the puzzle was great and I respect the craftsmanship and I cheated anyway because that is and has always been the entire point of me. He stepped through. I'm not the kid who flies after the right key. I'm the kid who picks the lock and lets the keys keep flying forever, guarding nothing because nobody asked them to stop. That's gonna be a metaphor before the night's out, calling it now. Somewhere far above, in a portrait in a stairwell, a painted knight who had been instructed to observe and report turned and galloped frame to frame toward the staff tower with news that the Potter boy had defeated the flying keys without getting on a broom, and that he appeared to be enjoying himself enormously, and that he kept talking to people who were not there. The chamber after the keys was darkness, and the darkness was the point. He felt it before he saw anything, the temperature dropping, the torchlight failing as though the air itself were eating the glow, and then a cold that had nothing to do with weather, the specific cold of a place built to reach into a person and find the thing they were most afraid of and hold it up to the light. A fear chamber, the white voice said, some variety of boggart magic or something older. It will show us our worst. It is designed to stop an intruder by giving them in vivid detail the one thing they cannot bear to face. Oh good, Harry said into the dark with genuine curiosity. Let's see what the machine thinks scares me. This is basically a personality quiz. I love a personality quiz. The dark obliged. It showed him the others first, clever, cruel, the people he'd let himself love in this new life. Ron, gray and still, Hermione, eyes open and empty, Hagrid, Neville, Dumbledore even. It laid them out one by one in the dark, the faces of everyone he decided were his dead because the chamber had reached into him and found the true thing, the actual fear, the one the white voice had named in a cupboard a year ago. Not death, death was nothing, death was a Tuesday, but outliving. The specific bottomless terror of a man who could not die watching everyone he loved do exactly that over and over forever. It was a good attack. Harry would give it that. It found the real wound. He stood in the cold and looked at the false dead faces of his friends, and he let it hurt one breath. He let it land the way he always did because pretending it didn't hurt was how you let the hurt run you. And then he did the thing the chamber had no answer for, the thing none of the traps had an answer for, the power the Dark Lord knew not. He kept walking. Yeah, he said softly to the dark, to the dead faces, to the ancient machine reaching into his chest. That's the real one, good find. 10 out of 10, that is the thing that scares me, that I'll bury all of them, that I'll keep going when they can't, that being unkillable means being the one who's always left. He walked through the false corpse of Ron and it dissolved into shadow as he passed. But here's what you don't get, what none of you down here get because you were all built by men who think fear is a wall. He walked through Hermione's, through Hagrid's, steady, unhurried, the cold breaking against him and finding nothing to hold. I already know I'm going to lose them. I knew it the day I decided to love them anyway. That's not a fear you can use against me, it's a price I already agreed to pay. I looked at forever and I looked at how much it was going to cost to spend it caring about people who break, and I said yes on purpose with my whole chest because the alternative is spending eternity alone and untouchable, and that's not living, that's just not dying, and I've met the difference. He reached the far door. The dark recoiled from him now, baffled, its best weapon spent on a man who had walked into it carrying the wound already open and unashamed. You can't scare a man with the bill when he's already decided the thing was worth the cost. Nice try though, genuinely. Tell the next chamber I'm coming, and tell it I'm not afraid of dying or of living, which I'm aware leaves a guy with very little leverage. He stepped through into light and warmth, and behind him the fear chamber guttered and went quiet, defeated by the one intruder in 1,000 years who had answered its worst with a yes. The next chamber was a chessboard, and the chessboard wanted to fight. It filled the room floor to wall, black and white squares the size of beds, and on it stood chess pieces carved from stone and taller than Hagrid knights on monstrous horses, a queen with a face like an axe, the whole grim army waiting in the dark with the patience of things that had been promised violence. To cross the room, Harry understood at a glance. You were meant to join the game, take the place of a piece, and play your way across the board, and the pieces played for keeps. A captured piece was not removed, but shattered, dragged off and smashed, and the white pieces ahead were already shifting, already turning their blank carved faces toward the small intruder at the edge of the board. A normal first year would have had to play. Hermione had told him the story of it later, the version Ron would have lived. Ron, who was brilliant at chess, sacrificing himself, taking a blow meant to clear the path, the noble bleeding the board gambit that the whole trap was designed to demand. Harry looked at the board and at the army and at the long lethal game it wanted him to play, and the white voice said very dryly, Harry agreed. He did not step onto the board. He walked around the edge of it, along the thin border of stone between the squares and the wall, a ledge perhaps 6 inches wide, the kind of margin that a careful man with no fear of falling and a great deal of practice at moving along the edges of things could cross without ever once setting foot on a single square. The White Queen's head tracked him as he went, the great stone army tense, waiting for him to commit to the game, and he simply never did. He edged along the wall, flat against the cold stone, humming to himself, while a chess set built to murder its way across an hour-long match stood frozen in confusion, because their entire existence was predicated on an opponent who played, and the opponent had declined to play. He reached the far door, hopped off the ledge, and turned to give the stone army a small apologetic wave. Sorry, fellas, I know you were promised a game. Here's the thing about games, somebody decides the rules, and they only work if everybody agrees to be inside them, and the second one guy stands up and walks around the edge of the board, the whole thing's just a bunch of furniture. He pushed open the door. No offense, you're magnificent furniture. If I ever need a chess set that commits aggravated assault, you're my first call. The chamber after that announced itself before he saw it, by smell, a foul, sweet, rotting stink that punched up the passage and watered his eyes. He came around the corner and found a mountain troll, larger and uglier than the Halloween one, sprawled unconscious across the floor with a bloody lump rising on its head, already taken down by someone who'd come through ahead of him. Quirrell got here first, Harry murmured, stepping over a leg the size of a tree trunk. The white voice was already cataloging. The troll's down but breathing. Quirrell didn't kill it, just dropped it, which means he's conserving, which means he's saving everything for the chamber ahead. He's close. We're nearly at the bottom. Yeah, okay, he's at the stone or close. End of the gauntlet's coming up. Harry rolled his shoulders and the grin sat steady on his face, but underneath it the old soldier was coming fully awake now, the part that had walked into 100 final rooms, the part that knew the difference between the puzzles and the place where the puzzles stop and the actual fight begins. One more. There's always one more puzzle right before the boss. Dumbledore won't have wasted the last room on a riddle, he'll have. The next chamber was a riddle. A long table, 7 bottles of different shapes and sizes, and a roll of parchment in spidery handwriting, and the instant Harry crossed the threshold, purple flame roared up across the doorway behind him and black flame roared up across the doorway ahead, sealing him in. The riddle he saw was a logic puzzle. Of the 7 bottles, one would carry you forward through the black fire, one back through the purple, 3 were poison, 2 were harmless wine, and the parchment offered the clues to deduce which was which. It was, Harry recognized, a genuinely elegant little puzzle, Snape's work. He'd have bet his vault on it, all cold logic and no flash, the kind of trap a brilliant bitter man built when asked to contribute one room to a colleague's escape course. A clever child could solve it with patience and a clear head. He started to idly, the white voice clicking through the logic. The smallest bottle goes forward, the clues eliminate, and then the red voice said gleefully, why? Harry stopped. He looked at the 3 bottles the riddle wanted him to be afraid of, the 3 poisons, the 3 deaths in glass, and he started to laugh because of course. The entire puzzle, the whole elegant lethal logic of it, was built on a single foundational assumption, the same assumption the killing curse had made, and the staircase and the broom and the corridor curse in October, the assumption that ran underneath the whole wizarding world like a buried cable. That poison would stop him. You built a death trap, Harry told the empty chamber, the purple flame, the black flame, the 7 innocent bottles, for people who can die. And he picked up the 3 poisons and drank all 3 one after another like a man doing shots at the worst bar in the world. They hit him like 3 trains. The white voice cataloged the damage with appalled professional interest. That one's stopping the heart, that one's liquefying the stomach lining, that one I don't even recognize, the lungs are filling, and it hurt. It hurt the way everything always hurt, the healing factor taking the damage and leaving him every screaming second of it. And Harry went down on one knee on the cold stone and shook and bled from somewhere and felt 3 different deaths try to set up shop in his body at once. And then the engine woke up, the old tireless patient thing, and went to work, and won the way it always won, dragging his organs back from 3 separate edges, flushing the poisons out through skin and breath, rebuilding faster than 3 of the deadliest substances in the wizarding world could tear down. It took perhaps 90 seconds. They were not pleasant seconds. At the end of them, Harry stood up, wiped his mouth, swayed once, steadied, and looked at the 2 remaining bottles, the wine, the forward passage potion, with watering eyes and a grin that had gone slightly unhinged at the edges. Okay, he wheezed. That was a bad idea and I'd do it again. Tell Snape the riddle was immaculate and I solved it by being a medical impossibility. He's gonna hate that so much, it's gonna be the best part of his week. He picked up the small bottle that the logic said carried you forward through the black fire, considered it, and drank that one too because at this point what was one more? Bottoms up, last room, let's go meet the man who wants my warranty. And Harry Potter walked into the black fire, which did not burn him, and out the other side into the final chamber where a man in a turban stood before a great golden mirror, and the whole long game came down at last to its final board. The black fire didn't burn, but it did something stranger, it whispered, the way deep magic does when it brushes against something it half recognizes, and for the length of the crossing Harry walked through a darkness full of murmured questions in a voice that wasn't quite his own. You could turn back, the dark seemed to say. You've proven the point. The old men have seen what you are. Walk out now and live 1,000 quiet years. Nah, Harry said to the fire, to the dark, to the part of himself that the chamber was prodding at. See, that's the thing about 1,000 quiet years. I've done the math on quiet. Quiet is just the cupboard with better square footage. He kept walking. I didn't come back from the dead to be safe. Nobody comes back from the dead to be safe. You come back to be in the story. And then he was through into the last chamber, and the whispers fell away, and the real thing waited. He took one moment at the threshold, allowed himself it, the way an old soldier allows himself the breath before the door, and the two voices that had ridden in his skull since a paper cut in a cupboard came up one last time before the end in stereo, the way they only did when it mattered. Final room, the white voice said, cool and clear and entirely without fear. The thing wearing Quirrell is at the mirror. Voldemort's consciousness is present. We have no allies in this room and no plan but the one in our head, and the one in our head is reckless beyond anything we have ever attempted. A pause. I have run the numbers 11 different ways. I want it on the record that by every conventional metric this is insane. Seconded, said the red voice, glowing, absolutely deranged. No notes, I've never been prouder of us. Good, Harry murmured and rolled his shoulders and felt the healing factor settle under his skin like a tide deciding to come in. Insane's the only thing they never planned for. Smart they planned for, brave they planned for, even crazy the regular kind they've got a counter. But a guy who's thought it all the way through and decided to do the insane thing anyway on purpose with a smile. He grinned into the warm light of the final chamber. That's a new category, and new categories are where I live. He drew one breath, the last quiet one. Okay, boys, curtain up, let's go ruin a Dark Lord's whole decade. He stepped into the light, and the long game's final board lay open before him at last. The mirror of Eris stood in the center of the last chamber, the same tall gold-framed glass from the abandoned classroom, moved down here to be the final guardian, because Dumbledore, that sentimental genius, had hidden the Philosopher's Stone inside a mirror that would only surrender it to a person who wanted to find the stone but not use it, a lock that opened only for the pure of intent. It was, Harry thought, the single cleverest hiding place he'd ever encountered. You couldn't pick it. You couldn't force it, you could only be the right kind of person, and almost nobody was. Queerness Quirrell stood before it, turban gone now, and he was pawing at the glass and muttering, his face slack with frustration because the mirror was showing him the stone but would not give it to him, would not give it to a man who wanted to use it, and the wanting was the disqualification. You, Quirrell snarled, spinning, and his eyes fixed on Harry with a hatred that wasn't entirely his own. Potter, of course. Of course it's you. Hi, Queerness, love the new look, the turban was hiding your best feature. Harry strolled into the chamber as though arriving at a party he'd been looking forward to for months, which in fairness he had. So let me guess. Mirror shows you the stone, won't cough it up, and you can't figure out why, and it's killing you, except nothing's killing anybody tonight, that's sort of the whole theme. He stopped a careful distance away, hands loose, mapping the room exits, the fire behind the mirror, the man, the thing on the man. The mirror only gives the stone to someone who wants to find it and not use it. It's a purity test. You failed it. I'd fail it too for the record. I don't want the stone at all. Immortality's overrated. Trust me, I'm the world's leading expert, but at least my failure's honest. He lies, hissed a voice that did not come from Quirrell's mouth. It came from the back of his head. Quirrell reached up slowly and unwound the last of the turban and turned, and there where the back of a man's skull should have been was a face. A second face, chalk-white, flat-nosed, with red eyes and slits for nostrils, a face like a death mask grown into living flesh, the most evil wizard of the age reduced to a parasite riding the rear of a weak man's head. It was, Harry would reflect later, genuinely one of the more upsetting things he had seen in 2 lives full of upsetting things, and he had seen his own face after Weapon X Harry Potter, breathed Lord Voldemort, the red eyes drinking him in with naked, hungry fascination. At last, let me look at you, the boy who cannot die, the boy who laughs at the one thing the whole world fears. Do you have any idea at all what you are? A guy who really needs you to know that having a face on the back of your head is a choice and a bad one, and you should feel that, Harry said. Seriously, Tom, of all the surfaces, the back of the head, you couldn't get a hand, a nice torso situation. You went with the one spot you can't even see what you're doing. Silence. The red eyes blazed. I have waited 10 years as less than the meanest ghost. 10 years of drinking unicorn blood and possessing rats, all because death, the only enemy I have ever feared, took everything from me. And then I learned there is a child, the very child who unmade me, walking the earth in a body that death cannot touch. The whisper trembled with something that was almost rapture. You are not my enemy, Harry Potter, you are my salvation, that body, that deathless, tireless, perfect body, with the stone, with my knowledge, with my will inside it, we would be a god. We would never end, join me, or rather, the white face split into something that wanted to be a smile, lend me the warranty, and I will make you immortal in legend as the boy who gave the world its eternal king. Yeah, see, that's a hard no, but I appreciate the pitch. You clearly worked on it. Harry's voice stayed light, but underneath it the old soldier had finished mapping the room and the white voice had finished the math and the plan was unfolding in his head, beautiful and stupid and perfect. Counteroffer, you get back in the smoke, you leave this castle, you leave my friends in this body alone, and in exchange I won't spend the next several minutes doing the single most humiliating thing that has ever happened to a Dark Lord. And it will be humiliating, Tom. I've had 2 lifetimes and 1 healing factor to think about how to lose a fight in a way that ruins the winner. You do not want to be the answer to the question, how did the most feared wizard of the age get embarrassed by an 11-year-old? The red eyes narrowed. And then Lord Voldemort, who had never in his long monstrous life been able to resist taking a thing he wanted, made the decision that every villain in every story Harry had ever been in eventually made. Kill him, Voldemort hissed to Quirrell. His body heals, it does not matter how, break it, take it, hold it down until I can pour myself into it, kill him and hand me the vessel, and Quirrell lunged, and the chamber exploded into violence. What followed, Harry would always insist, was not really a fight. A fight implies 2 people trying to win the same thing. This was something stranger, a man desperately trying to kill a boy who could not be killed, and a boy cheerfully refusing to cooperate with his own murder, and the gap between those 2 projects was where the chaos lived. Quirrell's first curse caught Harry full in the chest and threw him into the wall hard enough to crack stone and ribs. Harry slid down, said, "Ow, okay, that's the ribs," noted, and stood back up while the ribs ground themselves whole. Quirrell's hands closed around Harry's throat, and at the touch, Quirrell screamed, his fingers blistering, charring, crumbling to ash because the old protection in Harry's skin, his mother's love still living in his blood, burned the possessed flesh like acid. That Harry hadn't expected, and he followed it instantly, even mid-fight, even with a man's burning hands at his throat. The love protection still in here, it hurts the thing wearing Quirrell, good, useful, file it, but it was the healing that broke them. Because Quirrell, screaming, half his hands gone to ash, threw curse after curse in a rising panic, and Voldemort's red eyes watched from the back of his skull with mounting, disbelieving horror as every single wound closed. A slashing curse opened Harry's arm to the bone, the arm sealed shut. A blasting curse caved in his sternum, the sternum reknit with a wet click. And for one moment, one cold, baroque, terrible moment that Voldemort would carry into whatever passed for his nightmares, the Dark Lord saw the thing for what it truly was. He saw the boy take a wound that should have been mortal, and he saw, in the half-second of the healing, something vast move under the child's skin. A deep and ancient and tireless patience, an engine older than the boy wearing it, a thing that had decided in another life in another world that this collection of cells was not allowed to stop, and would enforce that ruling against curses, against poison, against the killing word itself, against the will of the most powerful dark wizard who had ever lived, with the bored, bottomless, godlike indifference of the tide coming in. Voldemort had spent his whole life seeking to conquer death. And here in a child's body, death had simply been told no permanently by something that did not even seem to find the question interesting. "What are you?" the Dark Lord whispered, and for the first time in the entire long war there was fear in it. Harry stood up in the wreckage, bleeding from a dozen wounds that were already closing, the little ancient son of his own impossible body burning quietly under his skin, and he smiled at the most feared wizard in the world with 2 lifetimes of warmth and ruin in it. "I keep telling people," he said. "Nobody listens, maybe you'll listen, Tom, you seem like a good learner." He cracked his neck. "I'm the one who showed up, and I'm not done." And then Harry stopped playing defense, and the chamber learned what unleashed meant. He did not duel Quirrell. Dueling was a wizard thing, a fair fight thing, 2 men bowing and trading curses by the etiquette of murder, and Harry had told an entire wand shop and an entire headmaster and an entire world that he did not fight fair, fight clean, or fight the way the script wanted. So he fought the way a mercenary with nothing to fear and a body that couldn't break fights a man whose hands were turning to ash. He went in, he closed the distance Quirrell's curses were trying to keep, because every curse that hit him only fed the engine and bought him a step, and a wizard with no time to aim was just a frightened man with a stick. He took a blasting hex to the shoulder and let it spin him into the range Quirrell didn't want, and then he grabbed the man, grabbed him with both small hands, skin to skin, and the love protection roared up through his palms and Quirrell shrieked as the burning spread, his arms blistering, crumbling, going to gray flaking ruin. "You know what's funny?" Harry said, conversationally, holding on while a man came apart in his grip, his own voice steady through the screaming. "Your boss spent 10 years scared of dying, and the thing that's killing this body right now isn't a curse, isn't a stone, isn't dark magic, it's love. My mom's love, 12 years old and still in my skin, and it eats you alive on contact. You built your whole life on the idea that love was weak and death was the only real power, and you're dissolving right now because a woman you murdered loved her son enough to leave a fingerprint on him you could never wash off." He held on. "That's the joke, Tom. That's the whole joke. You were wrong about the one thing, and it's killing you on the back of a substitute teacher." Quirrell came apart entirely, collapsed into ash and ruin, the borrowed body failing all at once, and out of the wreck of him tore a thing of black smoke and red rage and rising shriek. The wraith of Lord Voldemort ripped loose from its anchor, formless, screaming, a column of furious shadow rising toward the chamber's ceiling with nowhere left to ride. And it did the only thing it could. It came for Harry, The smoke poured down at him, into him, trying to do to the unkillable body what it had done to Quirrell's: possess it, take it, climb inside the warranty, the most evil consciousness in the world flooding into the one vessel that could house it forever. It got perhaps a second inside before the screaming started, and it was not Harry's. Because here was the thing Voldemort had never understood about the body he coveted, the thing the white voice had known since a cupboard and a paper cut. It was not an empty vessel, it was occupied. It had two minds folded into one, and a healing factor that treated every intrusion as a wound to be flushed, and an old soldier at the center of it who had survived torture designed by the smartest sadists of another world. And the Dark Lord's invading consciousness did not find a body to steal. It found Wade Wilson's mind waiting for it, and the love protection burning in the blood, and a healing factor that began, with its bottomless, tireless patience, to treat Lord Voldemort himself as an infection. What is this? Get out of my— These are not— There are two of you. There is something wrong with this mind. It will not stop talking. Oh, buddy, Harry said out loud, while inside his skull the most feared wizard of the age met the red voice and the white voice in the full, unfiltered, 2 lifetimes deep interior of Wade Winston Wilson, and began immediately to come apart at the seams. You poured yourself into the one head in the universe that was already full, and we don't have a vacancy. And we don't share, and the part of me you're swimming in right now, it once narrated its own autopsy for fun to annoy the surgeon. You're not gonna survive the small talk. The wraith tore itself back out of him with a shriek that cracked the stone, fleeing the body it had spent 10 years coveting, because the body had turned out to be the single most hostile real estate in existence, a haunted house where the ghosts were worse than the intruder, where the healing factor flushed possession like poison, and the mind on the inside was so loud, so chaotic, so relentlessly itself that even a soul that had murdered its own humanity into 7 pieces could not stand to share the space for more than a heartbeat. And then it ran. The black smoke poured up and away, through the chamber, fleeing beat in a column of defeated shadow racing for the exits in the open air and survival, because that was the one thing Lord Voldemort had always been able to do that no one else could: not win, not always, but survive, slither away in smoke to rebuild another year. He had anchors in the world, the things he'd done to his soul, the backups. Harry had guessed it in the dungeon. He could not be killed tonight. He fled to live and try again. He fled directly into Albus Dumbledore. The headmaster stood in the doorway of the final chamber, had stood there, Harry realized, for some unknown number of minutes, having never gone to London at all, or having turned back, or having simply been the kind of wizard for whom doors were a formality. He stood and he watched the fleeing wraith, and he did not raise his wand to stop it, and the wraith tore past him and up through the castle and out into the night, gone, screaming, defeated. And Albus Dumbledore looked across the wrecked chamber, past the ashes of Quirinus Quirrell, past the mirror of Arist, at a small, bleeding, healing, grinning boy standing alone in the rubble, and the greatest wizard of the age, who had come down here at last, not to save the boy and not to instruct him, but simply helplessly to see, said the only thing there was to say. I let it flee, Dumbledore said quietly. I could have tried to destroy the wraith. I chose not to. There are reasons, anchors, as you have evidently guessed, that make tonight the wrong night for that fight, and I will explain them in time. His blue eyes moved over the destruction, the ash, the impossible, unbroken boy. But that is not the truth, or not all of it. The truth, Harry, is that I came down here intending to step aside and watch. And I have just watched the most powerful dark wizard of the age pour himself into you with the full intent to live in your body forever, and flee in under 2 seconds in pure animal terror because he could not stand to be inside your head. A long pause, something between horror and helpless, dawning delight moved through the old man's beard. Harry, I have spent my entire life afraid of what would happen if I ever stopped holding the board, and I have just learned that the answer is you. And I find I do not know whether to be terrified or to laugh. Harry wiped blood from his mouth, and the last of his wounds sealed, and he looked at the old man in the doorway and at the ashes and at the dark where his enemy had fled to lick its wounds and rebuild. Laugh, he advised. Trust me, it's the only move that's ever made sense. He grinned, exhausted and bleeding and gloriously, ruinously alive. He's gonna come back, isn't he, Voldemort? The anchors, he's not done. No, Dumbledore admitted, he is not done. Good, said Harry Potter, and the grin sharpened into something that 2 clever, frightened, powerful men, one fled into the dark, when standing in the doorway, would each spend a great deal of time not enjoying. Because neither am I. In the next round I get to plan ahead. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The last laugh. The thing about a Dark Lord with backups, Harry explained to a profoundly reluctant Albus Dumbledore over the following days, was that you didn't beat him by being braver. You beat him by being thorough. It took some doing to get the old man to talk. Dumbledore had spent a long career deciding which truths people were ready for, doling them out in careful portions like a man rationing food through a siege, and his every instinct screamed against telling an 11-year-old the full shape of Lord Voldemort's immortality. But Harry sat in the headmaster's office, ate the lemon sherbets Dumbledore would not, and simply refused to leave or to stop being correct, and eventually the dam broke, because the one thing a man who can see the whole board cannot stand is a player who can see it too and is cheerfully waiting for him to catch up. Horcruxes, Dumbledore said at last, the word falling into the quiet office like a stone into a well. He has split his soul. More than once, I believe the very fact that the wraith survived tonight confirms it. Each fragment is anchored in an object, hidden, protected. While even one remains, he cannot truly die. He can be banished, delayed, reduced to vapor as he was tonight, but he will always return. To end him, truly end him, every anchor must be destroyed first. The blue eyes were grave. It is the darkest magic there is, Harry. To make even one, a wizard must commit murder and tear his own soul in the act. Tom has done it again and again. He has made himself a thing held together by atrocities. Okay, Harry said and pulled out a fresh bit of parchment. How many, where are they, and what do they look like? Let's make a list. Harry, this is the work of years, of careful research. It's the work of years if you do it carefully, Harry agreed, scribbling. Careful is how you do things when you can die. Careful is for people protecting their one life. I've got a different risk profile. I can walk into every trap he's ever built, set off every curse, drink every poison, and take every hit because the worst any of his anchors can do to me is hurt, and hurt's just information. He looked up and the grin was back, the chaotic genius grin that made clever men nervous. You spent years not finding these things because you've been treating them like landmines you can't afford to step on. I'm gonna find them by stepping on all of them. I'm the world's first immortal minds. Point me at the field. And so began the strangest war the wizarding world never quite saw. Because Harry did not hunt the Horcruxes the way the script would have written it, the grim quest, the noble fellowship, the years of sacrifice. He hunted them the way Wade Wilson hunted anything, relentlessly, irreverently, and with a flagrant disregard for the dramatic conventions that made such quests take 7 books. He used the things no wizard thought to use. He used the lockpick and the crowbar and the climbing rope. He used the fact that he could survive things and therefore could go places that a careful man could not. He used Hermione, who turned out to be the finest researcher the project could have asked for, and Ron, whose loyalty and chessboard mind made him a strategist of unexpected gifts, and Snape, who knew where the dark things liked to hide, and even Dumbledore, who slowly, grudgingly, and then with a growing, alarming enthusiasm that frightened him, found himself for the first time in 50 years collaborating instead of orchestrating. A ring in a ruined shack, ringed with curses meant to kill any hand that touched it. A careful wizard had to disarm them one by one over weeks. Harry put the ring on, let the curse begin to blacken, and wrought his arm up to the elbow with a darkness that even his healing factor strained against strained. And won the way it always won, the ancient patient engine grinding the death curse out of his cells while Harry made jokes through gritted teeth, and then snapped the ring's stone with a hammer and walked away with the shed curse already healing, the first anchor gone. A locket at the bottom of a cave across a lake of the walking dead, behind a basin of potion that inflicted unbearable visions and a thirst that drove men mad. A careful wizard had to drink it in agony. Harry drank the whole basin in one go, sat down, wrote out every horror it had to show him, and there were horrors. 2 lifetimes of grief and failure, and every face he'd ever failed served up at once, and came out the other side hollowed and shaking and alive, the locket in his fist, the second anchor gone. He let himself have one breath for what the potion had shown him, the way he always did, exactly one, and then he got up. The cup was the one that nearly went wrong, and the way it nearly went wrong taught Harry something he kept. It sat in a vault deep beneath a wizard bank, behind theft curses that multiplied whatever you touched and burned what they multiplied, a chamber that would bury a careful thief alive under a roaring tide of red-hot replicating gold. Hermione's research had flagged the danger in red ink. A careful man would have spent months devising a way to reach the cup without touching anything else. Harry waded in and grabbed it. The curse did exactly what the books promised. Every surface he brushed spawned 100 scalding copies, gold cascading down, white-hot, filling the vault, searing him to the bone wherever it touched, and there was a great deal of touching. He'd known it would hurt. He had not quite known it would hurt like that, a furnace closing over him, the healing factor screaming to keep a head of metal hot enough to cook him where he stood, the pain so total that for one white instant even Wade Wilson's 2 lifetimes of practice at being on fire nearly weren't enough. He got the cup. He got out, dragged himself clear, lay in the cool of the bank's stone passage while his cooked flesh knit itself back into a boy, and he shook for a while, and the comedy was a long time coming back. That, the white voice said quietly when he could think again, was close. Not close to killing us, nothing is, but close to a place we should remember exists. There's a kind of pain that is large enough to make even us forget for a moment that we come back. We must respect that. It is the one weapon the unkillable should still fear, not death, but agony vast enough to drown the self. Yeah, Harry stared at the stone ceiling, the cup cooling in his ruined then mended hand. Noted, filed, underlined. He let himself have the breath, the one breath, and then he sat up because there was still a diadem and a snake and a dark lord, and the work didn't stop because the work had been honest about its cost. But he carried it with him after that, the memory of the gold, a quiet weight that kept the jokes from getting careless, a reminder that unkillable and untouchable were different words, and that he'd only ever been the first one. He destroyed the cup in the bank's own passage, with a fang from a basilisk Hermione had located through 3 days of frankly heroic library work, and the thing inside it, a screaming fragment of a sundered soul, tore loose and dissolved with a wail that sounded, to Harry's ear, less like a monster dying than like a frightened, ruined child finally being let go. He didn't say anything funny about that one. Some things you let pass in silence, even when you're you, especially when you're you. A diadem in a room of hidden things, a cup in a dragon-guarded vault, a snake that was the most dangerous of all because it moved and thought and stayed close to its master. Harry took them in turn, each by a method more undignified and more effective than the last, and the wizarding world, which had braced for a long, dark war, instead experienced a confusing series of events in which the boy who lived appeared to be conducting a one-child demolition tour of the most heavily protected dark artifacts in Britain, narrating the whole thing, and getting away with it because nobody, on either side, had the faintest idea how to stop a child who treated mortal peril as a series of escape rooms he'd already read the walkthrough for. "You understand," Dumbledore said to him, near the end of it in the office, looking at a list with all but one item crossed off, "that what you have done in months would have taken me a decade and cost me, I think, my life. You have unmade his immortality piece by piece, and you have done it while making jokes, and the only injuries you have sustained are ones that healed before the day was out." The old man shook his head slowly. "I spent my whole life believing the war against Tom Riddle would require the greatest sacrifice of the age, and you have reduced it to a to-do list. That's the secret, Albus." Harry crossed out the diadem with a flourish. "It was always a to-do list. Everybody just kept making it a tragedy because tragedy feels important and gives the survivors good speeches. But Voldemort's not a tragedy. He's a logistics problem. He's a guy who made 7 copies of his save file and hid them in dungeons. And the only reason it took anyone else so long is that everyone who came at him was afraid to die, so they had to be careful, so they were slow." He capped the quill. "I'm not afraid to die, so I'm not slow." And now he's down to one anchor himself, the body he's about to build, and no backups, and a very, very bad feeling because somewhere out there in the dark he's been getting reports, and the reports all say the same thing. Harry grinned. The boy is coming, and he thinks it's funny. They knew the resurrection was coming because Harry had made certain to find out. A Dark Lord reduced to a wraith and stripped of every anchor had exactly one move left: build a body and gamble everything on the war he'd waited 13 years to wage. And the old ritual for it, Hermione found the reference. In a restricted book Dumbledore had quietly stopped restricting once he'd accepted that Harry would simply pick the lock, required 3 things: bone of the father, flesh of a servant, and blood of an enemy forcibly taken to bind the new body and to draw power against the foe whose blood it carried. "Blood of an enemy," Harry read aloud in the headmaster's office and started to grin because the white voice had already seen all the way to the bottom of it. "He's going to want my blood, specifically the enemy, the one who unmade him, and he's going to take it by force in a graveyard somewhere in the dead of night at the exact moment he's most triumphant and most exposed." He set the book down, "which means I don't have to find him. He's going to send someone to come and get me. All I have to do is let them." "Absolutely not," said Hermione. "You can't just let yourself be kidnapped to a dark ritual," said Ron. "Harry," said Dumbledore quietly, and there was real alarm in it, the alarm of a man who had finally learned to fear for the boy rather than of him, "even you. There are things worse than death, and a creature like Tom at his moment of rebirth with you bound and bleeding on his altar will get the single worst houseguest of his entire eternal existence." Harry finished. "Think it through, Albus, you taught me to. He takes my blood to make himself stronger against me, but my blood carries the same thing that burned Quirrell to ash, my mother's protection, 12 years deep and still going. He's about to staple a piece of the one person death gave up on directly into his own veins, and he's going to do it on purpose, because he's so used to being the cleverest man in the room that it will not once occur to him that I'd let him." Harry spread his hands. "I'm not going to fight the resurrection, I'm going to attend it. I'm going to be the most relaxed person at my own kidnapping in the history of dark magic, and I'm going to let him pour my deathless blood into his brand new mortal body, and then, at his moment of maximum triumph, in front of every follower he's got, I'm going to explain to him slowly what he's just done." There was a long silence in the office. "You mean to humiliate him," Dumbledore said slowly, "at the precise instant he believes he has won. In front of everyone whose fear is the foundation of his power." "I mean to make his resurrection the most embarrassing night of his life," Harry agreed. "A Dark Lord can come back from death, Albus. We've established that it's annoying, he's got a real talent for it, but there's no ritual in any book for coming back from being a punchline. You can't rebuild a reign of terror after 30 witnesses watched you fail to scare a child at the height of your power." He turned to Ron and Hermione, and the comedy gentled. "Here's your job, and it's the same as it's always been, and it's still the biggest one. You stay here safe, in the light, and whatever story comes back from that graveyard, you make sure the true one's the one that survives, that the world hears not that the brave chosen one died nobly, but that the Dark Lord knelt in the mud and a kid walked away yawning. The true story is the weapon. You two are its keepers." Hermione's eyes were bright. Ron's jaw was set. Neither of them argued anymore because they'd had a year of learning that arguing with Harry about how to fight a war was like arguing with the tide about the shape of the shore. "And you, Albus," Harry looked at the old man. "You going to come save me at the dramatic moment like the old days?" Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled, the new smile, the one he'd learned that year, the one that came when he set the board down. "No," the greatest wizard of the age said. "I am going to do the hardest thing I have ever done, Harry. I am going to stay here, and I am going to trust you." A pause. "Try, if it is not too much to ask, to leave the man something to come back to, even Tom, even now." "No promises," said Harry, pulling his coat on against the winter night. "But I'll leave him alive. That's the cruel part anyway, alive and ridiculous and forever. Killing's never been my best work." He paused at the door and looked back at the three faces he loved in the warm gold office safe and let himself feel it for exactly one breath. Then he grinned and the breath was over and he was gone into the dark toward a graveyard and a ritual and the last laugh he'd been setting up since a paper cut in a cupboard a lifetime ago. Don't wait up and save me a sandwich. Actually, never mind, I'll bring my own. Lord Voldemort got his body back in the dead of a winter night, in a graveyard by the old dark ritual bone of the father, flesh of a servant, blood of an enemy, and he rose tall and white and terrible and whole for the first time in over a decade, and his Death Eaters fell to their knees around him in a ring of black robes and held breath, and for one cold, magnificent moment the most feared wizard of the age was restored to the height of his power. Ready at last to begin the war he had waited 13 years to wage, it was a genuinely impressive resurrection. Harry would say so later, sincerely. The staging was excellent. It was somewhat undercut by the fact that Harry was already there, sitting on a tombstone, eating a sandwich. Oh, don't stop on my account, Harry said, into the ringing silence that followed a Dark Lord's followers all turning at once to stare at the boy on the headstone. That was a great resurrection, 10 out of 10. The bone-flesh-blood thing was grim, very on-brand, and the kneeling circles a nice touch, real attention to ceremony. I took notes. He held up an actual notebook. I did have one question about the blood of the enemy part, though, because Tom, buddy, you used my blood. I watched your guy take it. And I just want to make sure you thought that through, because the whole point of using your enemy's blood is that it ties you to them, makes you stronger against them, but it also, he took a bite of sandwich, means a little piece of the guy who can't die is now baked into the guy who spent his whole life desperate not to. That's gonna come up. I'm not saying when, I'm just saying you should sit with it. Lord Voldemort stood in the center of his ring of horrified Death Eaters, newly embodied at the peak of his restored power, and looked at the cheerful child on the tombstone and felt the bottom drop out of the most important night of his second life. You, he breathed. Me, hi, so here's where we are. Harry hopped down off the tombstone and brushed crumbs off his robes, and the assembled Death Eaters flinched back from an 11-year-old as though he were the dangerous one in a graveyard full of murderers, and this was the thing they were all slowly realizing he was. While you were off getting your body together, I had kind of a productive few months. The ring gone, the locket, the cup, the diadem, gone. The snake, Nagini, lovely girl, gave her a humane end, which is more than she'd have gotten from you, gone. Harry ticked them off, and with each word the white face across the graveyard went a shade grayer and the red eyes widened, and something that the Death Eaters had never once seen on their master's face began slowly to dawn there. Every backup, every save file, every anchor you tore your soul apart to make. I spent the autumn walking into all of them and stepping on all of them and surviving all of them because that's a thing I can do and you can't, and I crossed them off a list. He smiled gently, almost kindly. You're not immortal anymore, Tom. You're just a guy, a very scary, very powerful, very mortal guy standing in a graveyard who just used the blood of the one person on Earth who cannot die to put himself back together. The silence in the graveyard was total. Even the wind had stopped. 30 Death Eaters stood frozen between their newly risen lord and a sandwich-eating child, and not one of them moved because the air had filled with the specific, suffocating pressure of a story whose ending everyone present had just realized they had badly misjudged. This is the part, Harry went on, conversational, walking a slow circle now, hands in his pockets, where you've got a choice and I want to lay it out fair because I'm not actually the monster in this story. You are, you've earned it, but I'm not. You can come at me. You've got your body, your power, 30 wands at your back, all the dark magic in the world. And you will hit me with everything, and it'll hurt, genuinely. I'm not going to pretend it won't. And then I'll get up, because I always get up, and you'll hit me again, and I'll get up again, and we'll do that for as long as you've got the stomach for it. And the whole time your followers are going to be watching their immortal, undefeatable Dark Lord fail over and over to kill one cheerful child. Do you understand what that does to a movement built on fear? Fear needs you to win, Tom. And you can't win this, you can only lose it slowly in front of everyone forever. He stopped and faced the Dark Lord across the cold graves. Or door number 2. There is no door, Voldemort hissed, but his voice had cracked just slightly on the edge of it, and every Death Eater heard it crack. You are a child, a trick, an aberration, AVADA. You can run, Harry said over the beginning of the killing curse, unbothered, the way you ran in the chamber, the way you've always run. You can slither off into the dark and spend the next however many years trying to figure out how to kill a man who can't be killed, while I spend those same years being delightful and protecting everyone you'd want to hurt and slowly, publicly turning the most feared name in the world into a punchline. The green light of the killing curse was building at the tip of Voldemort's wand now, and Harry watched it come with the mild interest of a man watching a kettle. Both doors lead to the same place, Tom. That's what I've been trying to tell everyone since I was 11. You built a whole life around beating death, and the universe answered you by sending the one person death gave up on. There's no version of this where you win. There's only how funny you want the loss to be. And Lord Voldemort, who had never in 2 lifetimes been able to do anything other than reach for a thing he wanted, screamed in fury and fired the killing curse point-blank into the chest of the boy who could not die. The green light hit Harry square in the chest and the world went out. He died. Cleanly, completely, the way the killing curse killed, no wound, no mark, just the lights going off all at once. He dropped to the frozen graveyard grass and his heart stopped and his breath stopped, and for a long cold second Harry Potter was, by every measure the wizarding world had, simply dead. The Death Eaters held their breath. Voldemort stood with his wand still raised, chest heaving, red eyes fixed on the small fallen body. And for one shining instant the Dark Lord allowed himself to believe. It worked, it finally worked. The aberration is dead, I have won. And then the healing factor reached down into the dark after Harry, the way it always did. The ancient, tireless, patient engine that had been told once in another life in another world that this collection of cells was not allowed to stop. And it dragged him back up by the spine. It restarted the heart the curse had stilled. It forced the breath back into the lungs. And there was something more this time, something the white voice clocked even as the lights came back on. A second thread of the same protection woven through Voldemort's own resurrected veins, the blood of the enemy he'd so cleverly used, recognizing its twin, refusing to let the killing curse hold, so that the death didn't just fail, it rebounded. A wash of recoil snapping back down the connection between them and dropping Voldemort to one knee in front of his own followers. Harry sat up in the grass, alive, whole, and patted his own chest. Yep, still here, killing curse take 2, same result as take 1, which you'd think a man would learn from, but here we are. He stood brushing frost off his robes while 30 Death Eaters stared at a boy who had just been definitively murdered and had gotten back up to complain about the grass stains. And oh, did you feel that? The rebound, that's the blood thing I warned you about. You put my unkillable blood in your veins, Tom. Which means now, on some level, you can't fully kill me without it bouncing back on you, because there's a piece of the deathless guy stapled into the death-obsessed guy. I did try to flag it, I made a whole notebook entry. This is not possible, Voldemort whispered on one knee, his power, his followers, his entire restored existence curdling around him in the cold. This is not, you cannot simply, there are rules, boy, there are laws to magic, to death, to, see, that's your whole problem, and it always has been, and I'm going to do you the courtesy of explaining it before this ends, because nobody ever explained it to you, and maybe that's why you turned out like this. Harry walked toward him across the graves, small and certain, and the Death Eaters parted before him without being told to. You believe in the rules. Both of you do, you and Dumbledore both, the two smartest, scariest men of the age, and you've spent your whole lives on opposite sides of a war that's really just an argument about who gets to enforce the rules. He thinks the rules should serve the greater good. You think the rules should serve you, but neither of you ever once questioned that the rules are real, that magic has laws, that death is a wall, that a prophecy is a destiny, that the story has to go a certain way because that's how the story goes. He crouched down in front of the kneeling Dark Lord, eye to eye, and his voice dropped, and the comedy didn't leave it, but something vast moved underneath it, the thing the Sorting Hat had recoiled from, the thing that had survived 2 whole worlds. And I'm the guy who read the rules, Tom, cover to cover. And then I figured out their suggestions. Death's a suggestion, the prophecy's a suggestion. Neither can live while the other survives. That was supposed to be a law of the universe, and I voided it in a cold room at Christmas by just deciding not to die and not to stop living. I broke the prophecy by declining it. And I've spent this whole life breaking every other rule you and the old man built your whole identities on, one at a time with a smile, because the single most powerful thing in any world, more than magic, more than death, more than prophecy, is a person who looked at the way things have to be and said no thank you and meant it. The Dark Lord stared up at him, and on the white inhuman face and the red eyes, there was at last the thing Voldemort had spent his entire existence fleeing from and inflicting on others and refusing ever to feel, not just fear, comprehension. The dawning, total, unbearable understanding of a creature that has built everything it is on a foundation and has just been shown gently by a smiling child that the foundation was never there. You wanted to beat death, Harry said softly. And the universe sent you a guy who is death's worst review, 1 star, would not recommend, could not get the customer to stay dead. He straightened up. You're done, Tom, not because I'm going to kill you, I'm not. Killing you just resets the clock, and honestly, killing's never been my best work. You're done because everyone here just watched. Your followers watched their immortal lord murder a child, and the child got up bored. They watched your own curse drop you to your knees. The fear's gone. And a Dark Lord without fear is just a sad, mortal, very pale man who tore his soul into pieces for nothing, kneeling in a graveyard, having finally met the one thing he could never frighten, conquer, kill, or understand. He spread his hands and the grin came back, full and warm and absolutely merciless. A guy who thinks he's funny. And then Harry did the thing that ended it, not a spell, not a sword, not a noble sacrifice. He simply turned his back on the most feared wizard of the age, in front of all 30 of his followers, the same calculated insult he'd shown Lucius Malfoy in a dark alley a lifetime ago, and he walked away, whistling, leaving Lord Voldemort kneeling and powerless and publicly, irreversibly diminished in the eyes of every servant whose terror had been the only thing holding his movement together, and over his shoulder to the Dark Lord, to the Death Eaters. To the cold graves and the watching night and the audience he'd always known was there, Harry Potter delivered the last laugh. The war's over, folks, he called, cheerful, fading into the dark beyond the graveyard's edge. Not because the good guy won, because the bad guy stopped being scary, and that's so much worse for him. Go home, tell your kids the boogeyman knelt in the mud and a child walked away from him yawning. That's the story now, that's the only story now. A pause, and then delighted to know one and everyone. And honestly, best one I've ever been in. Behind him, in the ruin of his resurrection, Lord Voldemort knelt among the graves while his followers, one by one, in the oldest and most human gesture of a collapsing empire, began quietly to slip away into the dark, and the most feared wizard of the age was left alone with the dawning, eternal, unkillable knowledge that he had finally met his equal, and his equal had found him boring. Albus Dumbledore found him afterward on the astronomy tower, where Harry had gone to watch the sun come up over a world that had, overnight and without quite noticing, stopped being afraid. The old man came up the stairs slowly and stood beside the boy at the parapet, and for a while neither of them said anything, which was its own kind of conversation between two people who had spent a year reading each other down to the bone. "He will not recover," Dumbledore said at last. "Tom." "Oh, he lives, he will skulk, he will plot, he may even trouble us again in some small way." But the thing that made him Voldemort, the fear, the myth, the certainty in his followers that he was beyond death and beyond defeat, you took that in a graveyard and you did not even raise your wand. His Death Eaters scattered before dawn, the ones with sense are already inventing reasons they were never truly his. A Dark Lord can survive almost anything, Harry. He cannot survive being laughed at by the one person he could not kill. You did not win the war. The old man's mouth twitched. You cancelled it. That was the plan. Harry watched the light come up gold over the lake. Clean winds make martyrs and movements. You kill the Dark Lord heroically, and his followers get a tragedy to rally around, a story, a someday he'll return. But you make the Dark Lord embarrassing, you make following him the most humiliating decision of a person's life, and the whole thing just quietly evaporates because nobody's ever built a movement on a guy who knelt in the mud while a kid walked off yawning. He glanced sideways. "I learned that the hard way, Albus, in the other life. I won a lot of fights the heroic way, and I buried a lot of people doing it. This time I did it ugly and weird and on purpose, and everybody I love is asleep in their beds. That's the trade. I'll take it every single time." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "I owe you a truth," he said finally. "Several, in fact, but one above the others, and I find to my own surprise that I wish to pay it plainly without the careful packaging I have spent a century perfecting." He turned to face the boy, and the morning light caught the ancient lines of his face, and for once there was no twinkle in the blue eyes, no distance, no gentle steering, only an old, tired, honest man. "I left you in that cupboard, Harry, for 10 years. I knew the kind of home it was. I told myself it was for the blood protection, and that was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I needed you shaped. I needed a boy who had known hardship and would therefore be humble, grateful, steerable, a boy I could guide gently toward the sacrifice the prophecy seemed to demand. I was prepared, Harry, to spend your life. I had it planned. A noble death at the proper moment to destroy the last of Tom's soul. I am telling you this because you have earned the truth, and because I will not insult the one person who ever saw through me by lying to his face on the morning he saved the world without me." His voice did not break, but it came close. "I am sorry, not the soft sorry of a man managing a conversation, the other kind. I was wrong, and I was cruel in the patient way that thinks itself wise, and I am sorry." Harry looked at him for a long moment. The sun cleared the hills. "I know," he said gently. "I've known since the first night in the shack when Hagrid told me about the blood protection, and I did the math. And I forgave you at Christmas by the mirror, and I meant it, and I still mean it." He turned back to the sunrise. "Here's the thing about me, Albus, the thing the mirror showed me when it couldn't show me anything I wanted. I've been the kid nobody ran toward. I've been the man who lost everyone. I've been dead. And I came out of all of it deciding, not feeling, deciding on purpose every single morning that I was going to be the guy who runs toward people anyway. That I was going to love things even though I can't die and they can. Even though loving things when you're immortal is the most dangerous game there is because you watch everything you love end and you have to keep going." He smiled, and it was the realest thing on the tower. "You spent your life afraid of what you'd lose if you stopped controlling the board. I spent 2 lives learning that the only thing worth having is the stuff you can't control. So we're square, old man. You don't owe me. Just do me one favor. For the next kid, the next prophecy, the next time the whole world hands you somebody small and tells you they're a weapon." "Anything," Dumbledore said quietly. "Ask them what they want," said Harry. "Before you decide what they're for, that's it. That's the whole secret. Nobody ever asked, and look how I turned out." He grinned. "A menace, an absolute menace. Best thing that ever happened to this castle." And Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, who had managed kings and dark lords and the destiny of the entire wizarding world, threw back his head on the astronomy tower in the gold of the morning and laughed, really laughed. The helpless, delighted, decades overdue laugh of a man who has spent his whole life holding the board and has just at long last been given permission to set it down. Harry stayed up there a while after the headmaster left, watching the world wake up. Down in the castle, Ron and Hermione would be stirring, would come looking for him with breakfast and 1,000 questions, and he'd tell them the true version, the way he'd promised, because somebody had to be the ones who stayed alive and remembered, and he'd pick the best ones for the job. Hagrid would cry. Snape would pretend not to care and would, in his cold, honest way, make sure the record was true. Neville would stand a little straighter. The whole castle would go on, ordinary and magical and gloriously unafraid, because a boy who could not die had decided, for reasons entirely his own, to spend his endless life making sure they didn't have to be. He didn't want a throne. He didn't want a prophecy. He didn't want the dead back or the war glorious or the story clean. He just wanted to be himself on his own absurd terms for as long as forever turned out to be. And for the first time in 2 whole lifetimes, leaning on a parapet in the gold of a brand new morning, Harry Potter, who was also Wade Wilson, who could not be killed, who had broken every rule of magic with a grin and come out on top, got exactly what he wanted. "Not bad," he said to the sunrise, to the whispers, to the audience he'd always known was out there somewhere, watching, grinning on his side. "Not bad for the kid in the cupboard." He stretched, and the morning was warm, and the whole impossible, endless future lay open in front of him like a joke he hadn't told yet. Okay, same time next adventure, and somewhere someone smashed a subscribe button and rang a bell, and the story, like the boy at the center of it, simply cheerfully refused to end. Chapter 7 End.